If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever had a strange, unexplained encounter with the unknown, from paranormal and supernatural to otherworldly? Share your story.
I saw something next to my bed when I was a kid in 2010. I was sleeping alone as I was in middle school, and I had a cat who could open doors. My cat would never sleep in my room, and her opening the door would never wake me up. One night it did. I wake up and see lights on in the hallway and assume my mother woke up. I curse my cat for opening the door on the left side of the wall opposite my bed. So I raise my gaze up and see her, long black hair. She didn't really have a face, but she was looking at me, kneeling beside my bed. In my cat the light was on. I saw her clearly and I froze in fear. I closed my eyes and prayed I imagined it, as I felt too terrified to scream for my parents. I wait a bit and open my eyes again to see if it's still there. It was. Just that this time the light in the hallway wasn't turned on anymore, though I haven't heard anyone turning it off. I close my eyes again, and then I remember I had a wooden vampire steak toy next to my bed. I thought if it can touch me, then I should be able to touch it too, so I reached for the steak with my eyes closed, grabbed it, and stabbed hard where the thing was. I didn't feel anything, and as I opened my eyes, nothing was there anymore. I didn't sleep that night anymore. I think 30 minutes later it was sunrise. It happened sometime in spring. Also, my parents told me they never went to the bathroom that night. So it couldn't have been them in the hallway. I've seen light orbs a couple of times. Once in the Bell Witch Cave in Tennessee. It appeared to come out of a strange large stalagmite that looked like an evil entity. The entire group saw it, and some had pictures of it. There is a rock grave a few feet away from there as well. The first time was way scarier. We had a steel framing business and had hired a guy from South GA to run it. We rented a nice house on a beautiful lake in Alabama. He would bring family up to work, and each would say the house was haunted and move back. I didn't think much of it even though they had similar stories. I agreed to help very early in the morning and was going to stay the night at that house because it was close to our plant. He had gone to bed, and I was on the couch watching TV. I finally felt like I could sleep, and I turned the TV off. Within 5 minutes I started hearing a woman screaming from the back bedroom. She was clearly being hurt badly. I jumped up and went to his room. When I opened his door and called his name, he sat straight up in bed and started speaking in tongues. I shut the door and went back to the couch, trying to talk myself out of everything I had heard. Then a door opened. I leaned over and looked down the hallway, expecting him to have woken up, but it wasn't his door that opened. It was the door with the screams. An orb came out of the room and was moving slowly down the hallway towards me. I grabbed my shoes and ran out of the house and drove home. It was very scary. An encounter with the unknown. This incident happened when I was 16 years old, in my village. Right in front of our house, there was a 2-story house that was haunted. Every night, you could hear a woman crying and screaming. People said that the owner of the house had burned his wife, 2 newborns, and his mother alive because his wife wouldn't give him money to drink. One day, while we were playing cricket, a boy hit a shot, and the ball landed in the haunted house. Everyone was scared to go get it. I, being mischievous, said I'd go get the ball for fun. I went inside, didn't find the ball downstairs, and went upstairs. Found the ball in a room, then started yelling for help from the window, jokingly. The other kids ran away scared. When I turned back, I saw a black figure standing in the corner of the room, with smoke and a nasty smile. I was terrified, peed my pants, and ran home. Told everyone what happened. My grandma removed the evil eye from me and tied a thread, saying not to remove it until I leave this place. First unexplainable experience, somebody help me make sense. There's a greenway close to my house in a rural town in the Smoky Mountains. I take my dog on walks there nearly every day. There's a huge hill, tens of acres, and field that runs along the sidewalk in a section of the park. The grass is approximately a foot tall and is soft grass that sways with the wind. Yesterday evening, while I was walking back to my truck after a long walk, I saw something moving quickly underneath the grass line. Splitting the grass like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. I estimate it to be going 80 to 100 miles per hour. It traveled in a straight line and probably went 1,000 feet in a few seconds. It moved smoothly and seamlessly and was way too fast to be an animal running through grass. The hill is extremely steep and not very accessible, so it rules out golf balls and stuff like that. It was actually coming kind of toward me and my dog, but it stopped at the edge of the field, and I was a good 20 to 30 feet away. Has anyone ever seen anything like this? I was too spooked to go over and check because its movement seemed very aggressive. It definitely didn't seem natural. Please don't treat me like a whack job, just tell me your theories of explainable possibilities. For years, I have had on and off success with the paranormal investigation business. As a young man, I have made a few rash decisions based on that foolish immortal feeling young people get. When I was 20, a friend took me to one of those rumored semi-local lights that appear on a road out in the middle of nowhere. We pulled up in my friend's truck. There's one house on this mile-long road. I'm in the back seat, and his girlfriend is in the front. We park under this tree, like the story says, and immediately the light appears. I'm floored, but my friend isn't having it. He's ready to leave, and I'm just getting started. I open the door and step out. I get on the side of the truck, and we test the light by driving with the headlights off. Surprisingly, the results are all over the place. The light will shift from one side of the street to the other, occasionally changing color. Sometimes it seems the light is getting closer. Sometimes it seems to be moving away, and occasionally it turns off completely, but the only consistent thing is to park under the tree. Then it comes right back. I can tell you that the light, at times, seemed to be only 100 feet or 30 meters away. So I get cocky and take off at a full sprint at it. My friend is in full panic mode. He's terrified. I'm going as fast as I can on the gravel road. There's a deep ditch on both sides and a patch of woods coming up on my right. I'm running uphill, and the light is about 50 feet in front of me. It's white with yellow and blue. It's too bright to see who's holding it or where it's coming from. I'm starting to get a little panicked because I can hear my friend's girlfriend behind me screaming my name. This wouldn't get to me typically, but my first name is Mike, and I had just watched the Blair Witch Project a couple days before. Anyway, I'm close. The light jets into the woods as I approach. Not at all like it's being carried, but more like on a line. I jump the ditch and barrel into the woods. The trees are thin but thick enough together that I can't see the source. Just light everywhere. The woods are bright and lit up. I stop for a moment to take a breath as my friend's girlfriend gets to me. She's freaking out, and we start arguing about why she's following me when I'm running towards the light, and the light turns off. Suddenly I find myself in the middle of these woods with no light. There were no cell phones back then. It's very quiet, and that's when I realized I was at the complete mercy of whatever was out there. We both just stood frozen in terror for minutes listening for anything. She broke first with a terrifying scream, and I took off running. She was right behind me. We ran down that road laughing and scared back to the truck. An unusual encounter from childhood. Hey folks, for years now I've been retelling a childhood experience to various friends to see if anyone has dealt with something similar. When I was probably 10-11, I was playing in a lower pasture on 80 acres of family land in the Santa Cruz Mountains in California with a friend and my little brother, both of whom were around 7/8 at the time. I remember vividly seeing a man standing just inside the woodline with the head of a stag. Dark, rough fur stopped at the collarbone, and it had an enormous rack that resembled somewhat the way tree roots look when they're blown over and pull out of the ground. Its chest was white-skinned and muscular but athletic, and it had what I remember looking like stripes painted on it in a dark color. Not stripes like a prison uniform, but occasional long marks running down an arm or from front to back. I don't remember exactly what its legs looked like, either covered in the same dark fur or wearing dark pants. Typically, I would dismiss it as a childhood fantasy, but my younger brother and his friend insist they witnessed it as well. Do you have any similar experiences? It seemed more neutral in temperament than aggressive, so I'm reluctant to really label it a skinwalker. I've also had folks compare it to Kernunos. Help, I feel like I'm being haunted, and I don't know what to think anymore. Ever since I was a kid, I've felt really connected to people, animals, and even objects. I've always been a huge empath. I care a lot, but I also get attached to things in a weird way. If I ever felt a connection to something, I couldn't throw it away. I still have tons of little objects that I've kept over the years, and I give each of them a special place in my room because they feel important to me somehow. When I was younger, I had a few imaginary friends, but one of them I could actually see and talk to. I've had a lot of strange experiences throughout my life, and even though I'm only 23, I've seen things I can't really explain. I've seen people who were dead or people who looked like they were from a different time period, but for some reason I was never scared of them. I've never been diagnosed with anything like psychosis or hallucinations or any other mental illness that could explain it. About 2 years ago I started getting really into the paranormal. I began meditating and trying to connect with spirit guides. Sometimes I free write or draw when I feel certain energies around me, kind of letting whatever comes through just happen. I'm not even sure if it's real, but since I started doing that, things have started to feel darker. I feel different now. When I'm alone, especially at night or walking upstairs, it's not just the normal someone's watching me kind of feeling, it's like I'm being followed. I tried that visualization method where you imagine a protective bubble or light around you, and at first it helped, but lately it feels like something is breaking through it. I've been touched and even scratched by something when I was alone. I've woken up with bruises that don't make sense. I went to the doctor, and they said it might be from hitting myself in my sleep, but I don't think that's what it is. Lately, I've been waking up sweating and panicking. One night I woke up and saw several people standing in my room, just watching me. They were clearly dead. Their bodies looked decomposed, like something out of a nightmare, but I was completely awake. I remember one was an African woman holding a fruit bowl, and another was a man with a tall top hat and a cane. It scared the life out of me and my boyfriend, who was next to me. But what really got to me was something my boyfriend told me recently. He said that about a year ago, he woke up in the middle of the night and saw someone lying next to him, but it wasn't me. He said it was a dark-haired woman, I'm blonde, with her eyes wide open, just staring at him. He said she looked dead. He turned on the lights, and when he looked again, it was just me sleeping there. He never told me until recently because it terrified him so much. That honestly shook me to my core, because it fits so well with all the other weird things that have been happening. I've had professional help on and off throughout my life, and there's never been any sign that I have a mental illness or any medical condition that could explain this. It's not carbon monoxide poisoning or anything like that either. I live in a big, safe, well-kept house. So I don't know anymore. Am I haunted by something? Or is all of this somehow just coincidence after coincidence? When I was in the army, I spent a few years in the Mojave Desert training units before they went to Iraq/Afghanistan. One night in 2007 the unit I was working with finished a mission at about midnight and was going to rest until morning. Instead of going home, I picked a nice secluded spot in a draw to take a nap in my Humvee. I fell asleep briefly but woke up to the sound of scratching gravel, like someone was dragging their feet probably 25 meters behind me. I looked into the darkness behind me and saw a humanish shape that was darker in contrast to the surrounding hill. It appeared to be moving toward me. I grabbed my nods, night vision devices, and looked up to see what was definitively a humanish shape, and it was slightly blurry, but not due to the nods. I could look to the side, and everything else was clear. So I had a blurry human-shaped shadow approaching me at a decent clip and could hear the movement. At that point I felt the most significant wave of fear I have ever felt. I had survived 2 high-intensity deployments as an infantryman and was, at the time, a fearless idiot. This felt like I had fear injected straight into my veins, like it was beamed at me. I started my truck up and zoomed off. As soon as I got away, I called up to see if there was anyone operating in that area, and there wasn't, which is why I chose that spot to begin with. I have a few encounters that were rather terrifying to me. The first encounter happened when I was about 13, I'm currently 20. I was lying restless in bed at around 12ish a.m. That's when I heard footsteps on our deck just outside my room. I froze in place. It couldn't have been a deer because I didn't hear any hooves. Not a bear because it was the middle of winter. And a few seconds after the footsteps stopped, I heard this super close growl. Like a big animal growl. It sounded as though it was inside of my room, directly in front of my face. I ran out into the living room and didn't go back into my room for a while. The next story wasn't my second or third encounter, just the second scariest. I was about 17 at the time, and I just got out of the shower when I felt something stinging on my side. I checked to see what it was, and there were 3 thin scratches on my side that immediately began to welt. It felt as if the scratches had just been inflicted the moment I looked. I wasn't sleeping well for a while after that. The last encounter wasn't long after the scratches healed. I was in bed, restless because I was too paranoid that something was going to show up. I close my eyes and hear voices coming from the corner of my room opposite from me. I open my eyes, and I see this semi-translucent pale white humanoid thing huddled up in the corner of my room, its back facing me. I got up and charged at it. I wasn't really controlling myself, probably the adrenaline. As I ran into the wall, the apparition disappeared. I ran out into the living room and didn't return to my room for a while. If you guys did listen to all of this, thank you for taking your time. Strange encounter in backyard. When I was a child, I was at my grandma's house watching the rain in the backyard through the 2 glass sliding doors. I watched someone in what looked to be one of those old diving suits come from the left of the backyard. It was crouching and holding a huge camera. I remember not feeling scared, which is why I know it was real because it didn't seem threatening. It began to take pictures of the house behind the fence, and then it continued walking back where it came from. I ran and told my grandma that someone was in the backyard, but when she went and checked, she got angry at me because she thought I was playing a trick on her. I still don't know what could possibly explain this. An unknown woman walked right past me, and I still don't know who she is. This happened over a decade ago and still gives me chills. This incident occurred in my grandma's old home. Walking through the front door, you are immediately in the living room/dining room, and straight ahead is a short hallway. My sister's bedroom is to the left, and almost directly across from her bedroom door is the bathroom. Right next to her bedroom would be my grandma's bedroom. This hallway is quite small, you could probably hold both the bedroom door and the bathroom door at once with each hand. So one night, probably around 10:30 to 11 p.m. or so, I am brushing my teeth with the bathroom door open. My youngest sister, let's call her Amy, was sleeping in the room with my grandmother. My other sister, let's call her Carrie, is lying on the couch in the living room with her headphones on. The couch is faced towards the front door, so if you were to walk towards the couch from the bedrooms, you would be looking at the back of the couch. Back to the story, I am brushing my teeth, and I turn around the same time Amy is walking past the bathroom from my grandmother's room. I follow directly behind her, questioning her on why she is up when she has school in the morning. She continues walking and sits on the couch. I am now facing the back of the couch, but I can't see over it. I am 4'7" inches. I am starting to get annoyed and getting louder. Why are you out here? Go back to bed. You always wake up late, and then you miss your bus. My other sister is lying down on the other couch and pulls her headphones down to ask me what I am doing. I tell her that Amy needs to stop ducking around and go back to bed. Carrie looks confused and tells me no one is here besides us. My heart drops. I walk around the couch, and sure enough, no one. The woman/girl who walked past looked exactly like Amy, slim build, tall with long black hair. I followed this girl. I ducking yelled at her. I am freaked out. I go back to the bathroom to rinse my mouth, and as soon as I turn the faucet, the water comes out black. I scream and turn off the faucet. Carrie runs in, and I explain to her that the water is black. She turns on the faucet, and for a quick second the water is black and just as suddenly flashes back to clear. We both scream. About a week or two later, Carrie was in the bathroom, and she started screaming. I run into the bathroom, and she is sobbing. I ask her what the hell is going on, and she just keeps repeating herself, "The girl in the mirror wasn't me." After she calmed down, she explained to me that she was washing her hands and looked up, and the girl in her reflection was not her. The girl looked similar to her, but she absolutely knew that it was not her reflection. I also want to add that I believe I was pregnant at the time, but I'm not absolutely sure. The Shadow Hoppers. Shortly after we moved in, my brother's friend nonchalantly asked me if I ever noticed the shadow people that live in my house. He stated that one of the shadow people would follow him home after he visited and stare at him through his bedroom window at night. This was extremely unnerving because I had been witnessing strange things, such as hearing something roll around on the floor upstairs or footsteps even though no one was up there. Something would sit on the edge of my bed every night. I could feel it sit down. Shadowy hands would squeeze my pillow from underneath it. I would watch the hand come up and slide back down under the pillow that my head rested on. Shapes would jump from one shadowed area to another shadowed area even though no light source changed. And most terrifying was hearing my name called out by an unknown voice. Guttural and deep-toned, always being projected from the dark corners, closets, and hallways. One time, I ran into the bathroom and slammed the door shut, trying naively to hide from it, only for it to say directly behind me, "Shutting doors won't help you." I was alone in the house at the time. I moved out shortly after. The rest of my family moved out a few months later. True story. I don't know what I saw. This is my first time sharing here, and I hope to receive some answers, whether I do or not. I mean, I believe in spirits and different energies but have never really bought the idea of Hollywood-type horror. This all happened when I was a kid, I mean, maybe 6 or 7. I remember that my mom was going through her divorce, and at that time, I was living with my grandma because she didn't want me to be exposed to the difficult situation my mom was likely facing. This was unfortunately a time when I was in a really sad and vulnerable state, as I would often ask my grandma why mom won't come see me and why everyone is saying that no one wants me anymore. I would often hear that from school kids as they would make fun of my family situation. I was new in school. I felt alone and almost hopeless that I'd have my mom again. Moving on. One night I was sleeping next to my grandma, and I woke up to a really terrifying sound, almost unearthly and uncanny. I opened my eyes, and right there on the side of the bed was this terrifying creature sitting, this ducking thing. I don't know what it was. It resembled a woman but was not a woman. It had long hair, and it was so dark that I could see it through the dark room. I froze in my bed and was so shook that I couldn't blink my eyes for a good minute. I think my eyes started watering. Under the sheets I tried with my other arm slowly to get close to my grandma's arm and start poking it hard. I mean, as hard as a kid like me could, and suddenly I felt blood-like stickiness on my fingers. I thought I had made a hole in my grandma's arm. She didn't respond, almost like she was dead. Seeing no hope, I just closed my eyes and started praying. After a few minutes of keeping my eyes closed and praying, I experienced silence and nothingness. I opened my eyes to nothing. Whatever it was gone. Nothing there. Next thing I know, I woke up, went to my grandma, hugged her, and asked her about yesterday, and she just said, "Honey, you didn't sleep with me last night." What? WTF. I know it was real because I had my grandma's hair in my hand. I had short hair at that time. I don't know, it's all just scary. I still remember what that thing kept muttering the entire time in its ghastly, disgusting voice, "Ka-hoom-hoom." What is that? What does it mean? My grandma brushed it off, thinking that maybe I was dreaming. I was terrified. I know it wasn't a dream, as where did her hair come from? Why did it feel so real? I genuinely had my grandma sleep with me in my room. I remember one time when I heard someone call my name several times from both the guest room and the kitchen. The voice often sounded like my grandma's. Whenever I would answer nothing, I would go to my grandma and ask if she called me nothing. She did, I think, the third of the fourth time, and told me to not answer it back, as some negative energy can latch onto me. See, guys, this was not the last time stuff like this has happened to me. Actually, it is ongoing. This is almost like a request for some info. Has anyone gone through something like this before? What does that ka-hoom-hoom mean? I have searched through the internet but have found nothing. The entity was not speaking any language, it was just repeating that phrase over and over. I'm in my 20s now and still don't know what the duck that means. PLS guys, if you have any info or have had any experience like this, just let me know. Unknown entity. This particular encounter occurred when I was around 15. I had just started getting into cannabis and alcohol, but I don't really think substances played a role. I was not under the influence and had other experiences prior, which led me to believe an entity occupied the structure. Anyways, I was in bed trying to sleep when, out of nowhere, I was in a half-fetal-like position. My body turned 180 degrees in a counterclockwise motion. It wasn't too fast or slow. I was stunned, afraid, and speechless and tried convincing myself it was a dream. I knew it wasn't, though, which made it all the more terrifying. I didn't feel any pressure on my body nor any sensation that would have been produced by something grabbing me. That encounter was beyond anything I had ever experienced. It felt malicious, like something didn't want me at peace. I just lay there, still, almost like a possum when danger is sensed. In the moments prior, I didn't hear or sense anything, and there wasn't a change in temperature. That was that, it never happened again. Has anyone had a similar experience? I'm curious if anyone has any similar experiences or insights to share. I and the other women who went through this believe it was high-level demonic, but we haven't heard of anything similar happening to anyone else. This was 3 years ago. We worked at a club in southwest Montana and usually got off work around 3 to 4 a.m. I and 3 other women were carpooling home at around 3:30 a.m. We hit this stretch of highway where it's incredibly dark and there's nothing to be seen for miles. We haven't seen another car coming or going in a few minutes, which isn't too odd. We go under this overpass and come upon pools of blood in the road that appear fresh and splash against the tires and car. As we get farther, they get so much larger that they take over our entire side of the road and continue as one long continuous pool. Now as soon as we hit the blood, all of us experienced immediate, extreme, heavy dread and an intense desire to get out of the car and go into the tall brush along the road. It was like being enveloped in a dark cloud that weighed so heavy on each of our minds we couldn't focus. It felt malevolent and violent. It was so intense that we were crying and clawing at the door handles to get out. 2 girls were screaming at the driver to pull over and stop the car. We just needed to go into the brush and look for something. I believe if we had stopped and gotten out of the car, at least one of us, if not all, would have met a very violent end. The driver refused, and she made us all focus on and feel the rosary beads she had hanging from her rearview mirror, so we had something to center on. She kept going and refused to let us out until the blood stopped. As soon as we were out of the blood patches, the heavy dread and intense calling immediately lifted, and we all felt, for the most part, normal again. We got back together in the morning and went back to the same area and checked for blood or any sign of what we had seen or felt last night, and there was absolutely nothing. There had been no rain or cleaning to make the road spotless like that when there should have been dried blood for miles. Whatever this was, it seemed to emanate from a powerful and malevolent entity. I'm not religious, but I do believe it was a high-level demon, if that's even possible. I and the driver have been through some very traumatic things in life, and neither of us has ever felt as deep and horrible dread and hopelessness as that night. I often think about this and try to find similar experiences, but I haven't made any progress. I've tried talking to the other girls about it, and only one will truly talk about it, the driver, and she is also stumped. The other two are still scared and will only confirm that it happened but won't look into it or go back to the area. When my brothers and I were younger and lived in our wooded, rural-ish home, we woke up in the middle of the night and witnessed a green light in our bathroom. Always wondered what it could have been. The story. My two brothers and I shared an attic bedroom and slept in 3 beds. We had a bathroom on the far side of the room. One night, my brother woke up, and I woke up after hearing him say, "Guys, wake up. What is that?" Or something to that effect. There was a green, solid, dim light in our bathroom, and it illuminated the room enough that we could see the toilet, shower, etc. The light itself seemed strange, like I almost couldn't focus on it. We were scared, so my brothers climbed into my bed, where we watched it slowly move about the bathroom. Finally, it flew out of the bathroom towards us, which obviously scared the absolute shit out of us, and we all screamed and flinched. After that, the creature disappeared, and although I don't recall our exact actions afterward, it's likely that we all went back to sleep after a short time. My brother and I still remember and talk about it, but our other brother was too young and doesn't really remember that night. I've read/heard it could be a fae, a ghost, an extra-dimensional creature, or ball lightning, but who knows? Does anyone have a theory or any similar experience? Thanks. When I was about 10 to 12, I woke up around 5 a.m. and saw it had snowed. I turned on the radio to hear if school had been cancelled, and it was. I turned off the radio, and shortly after, I heard footsteps in the snow outside my window. Outside my window was our back deck, and I recall vividly the sound of steps in the snow. They walked to the back sliding glass door, the door opened, and I now heard the steps going down the hall. I was clutching my blanket in sheer terror, looking right out my door, which was wide open. The steps stopped right before crossing my doorway, then walked back the way it came. As soon as I heard the back door close, I ran to my parents' room in a panic. My dad jumped out of bed and grabbed his gun. He went out back, and there was no sign of any footprints. To this day I know what I heard, and I was wide awake. Whispering in the woods. Okay, so I've been back for about an hour now, and having confirmed with my mate that we both experienced the same thing has made this a whole lot creepier. Around 8 p.m., my mate and I grabbed some sleeping bags and a tarp and headed into the woods for a camping trip. We had been talking about it for a couple of weeks and had decided we should just do it. So we did. It was the worst day to do it, though. Rain, wind, and just above freezing temperatures. We got to a spot where we felt comfortable to start setting up, and after about 15 minutes of not tying, we had a pretty good tarp setup. We started to mess around with our air pistols, shooting beer bottles and just shooting the shit, when the rain started to come down hard. We both got under the tarp and tried to cover ourselves as best we could. Eventually my mate fell asleep, and the rain started to die down. It was about 11 or so then, and being the insomniac I am, I wasn't ready to sleep yet. I kept shooting bottles for a bit and started walking through the woods in tactical mode, quickly turning and crouching like an R6 operator. I got about 20 to 30 meters from the tarp when I noticed I couldn't hear my mate's music he uses to help him sleep. It wasn't completely silent, but still very quiet. I could have sworn I had heard whispers to my right, but when I shined my light, there was nothing there. Then to my left. Then behind. Not panicking yet but definitely spooked, I made my way back to the tarp. As I could start to see the blue outline, I could distinctly make out the word run from my right. I picked up the pace and woke up my mate by saying, "We need to go." I told him I had heard a gunshot nearby, and I thought we should leave, as technically we were on a farmer's land, and it's not unpopular for farmers to be lamping at night. We packed up quickly, and I suggested we just leave the tarp up, not telling my mate why because I didn't want him to freak out, but he insisted. I just cut the ropes and stuffed the tarp under my arm, and we started to leave. As we got to the tree line, my mate told me to be quiet. We waited for a minute in the dark until my mate started to run. We both ran all the way back to the main road and back to his. I asked him about what he had heard, and he said he could hear someone whispering, and then it went silent until he heard the very clear word run. We're both still talking about it now, Googling what whispering in the woods could mean, looking up ghost stories from the woods we were in, but we can't find anything. We're both pretty shook right now, and if anyone has an explanation, I'd love to hear it. Weird encounter, don't know where else to share it. So, this happened a few months ago. I was walking towards my house in broad daylight, and I caught it in my periphery. A pitch black human, not humanoid, with real human proportions and build, figure, with its head missing. It didn't seem to pay any attention to me and disappeared after walking behind something. It didn't come out on the other side, and it wasn't there when I checked. Here's the thing. It wasn't like thinking you saw something in the branches or seeing faces in kitchen taps. I saw it. Please help me find some explanation. My experience with something unknown to me. I wanted to share my experiences over the course of my life to see if anyone has any opinions about them. There are a few incidents in my life that I just can't explain, and I turn them over in my head and don't know what they mean. The first was about 15 or 16 years ago. I was sitting in the kitchen with my younger brother. We were both little kids. My mom was in the shower, and my dad was at work. All the windows were closed. But my brother and I both heard what sounded like someone calling my name. It just sounded like a normal person. We thought it was our dad at first, but he wasn't even home. Our mom hadn't heard it. This happened in Texas. My brother still remembers the incident now, so many years ago. My fiancé says he might just have remembered or heard it in the first place because he wanted to be like his older brother, which might be true. But I don't know. The second happened in Florida, about 6 years ago. I was asleep in my room, and at about 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up, which is characteristic of me, waking up in the middle of the night randomly, and saw the wall outside my bedroom flashing red, like a police siren. But for it to be that bright and in that part of the house, it would have had to have come from the bathroom, which had a window at the end, but it only overlooked our neighbor's yard, not the road. No one else in the house recalls anything like that. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't want to find out, so I just went back to sleep after a minute. The next happened in Connecticut, about 3 years ago. My brother and I were going to sleep at around midnight. We shared a bedroom because it was just a temporary living setup, and as we were lying down, the window between us started flashing blue and red. I thought it was something like a police siren again, but we didn't hear anything, and we were also pretty far from the main road. We lived on the second floor. The last really strange thing happened, again in CT, just 2 years ago. I lived in the basement in some kind of spread out, country-like suburb or something, and I lived under my brother, who lived on the main floor. I woke up around 3 a.m., and I thought I heard gunshots and footsteps, almost like someone playing Call of Duty, which my brother would be likely to do at around 3 a.m. I figured it was just him playing a game and then went back to bed. The next day, he asked me if he woke me up. I said he did and that he was playing COD pretty loud. He said he was playing Minecraft with his headphones on. We lived out in the woods, so it also sounded like something that could have happened in our own yard. That's all that's happened to me. I think about it a lot and don't know what to make of it, but nothing really has happened lately. I hope you all enjoy listening to it at least. Unknown spiritual encounter. When I was in my junior year of high school, I lived in a mobile home with my mother and her, at the time, husband in Fort Worth, Texas, and I can honestly say that I was always uncomfortable in my own room. I always felt that I was being watched and tried to stay out of the house as much as possible. Know that while I am a Christian, I don't believe heavily in the supernatural, or at least I didn't until this happened. I was sleeping in my younger brother's room while he was with his dad, not the man who my mom was with, and I got up to use the bathroom, which connected to my room. While in the bathroom I heard scratching at the door to my room, which freaked me out because we didn't have any pets. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard an inhuman growl, which didn't match any animal that could have been in the area. I immediately backed away and spent the night in my brother's room praying until the next morning. When I went to my room the next day, everything was a mess. All my clothes were out of their proper place, and my TV, which was heavy to move, was in the middle of the floor face down. I told my mom, and she brushed me off until I showed her my room. Needless to say, we spent the day blessing the house and had my grandmother come over with holy oil to be safe. Ever since, I have been a bit paranoid about when my next encounter could happen. I think there is a ghost attached to me. This happened around 4 years ago. I was in my early teens. I was home alone one day. As many other times, because my mom and stepdad were visiting some friends of theirs. I just didn't feel like going with them. At first, nothing new occurred, except for the usual sounds, such as footsteps and the opening and closing of doors. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I got this awful feeling in my bones, and then I started hearing this male voice in my head talking to me. Right from the start, the male voice is telling me I shouldn't be here, that I should get out, and that I don't belong here. Initially, I believed I had lost my mind, but I questioned how that could be possible. My life is totally normal at this time except for some bullying, but I was used to it at this point since it had been going on my whole life, and this time it wasn't as bad. This time, there wasn't anything particularly bad happening at home. My dad had been an alcoholic and violent towards me and my siblings throughout my childhood, so why was I feeling this way now? I decide to go into my living room because that is where I sense this person, or whatever you want to call it. I can see a clear image of him in my mind. Of course, he has a reddish beard, and he isn't really that tall. He is wearing a lumberjack shirt with black pants. His eyes, I just couldn't really see what his eyes looked like. The closer I got to this person, the clearer his voice got in my head. I was starting to freak out because he kept telling me to get out, to leave, and that I didn't belong there. I just couldn't leave because I didn't know where to go. I was home alone, so I decided to call my sister. She is the only one who will believe me. My mom and stepdad keep telling me that it's all in my head. However, my sister has also encountered this ghost phenomenon, although her experiences have been more typical, involving steps and doors. I called her, telling her that I was scared and almost crying. While we were talking, I decided to go out to my backyard. Because I knew my cat would be there, I went out, still talking on the phone with my sister, who wasn't really helping me because she was at her friend's house and couldn't just come home to me. I then decided to hang up the phone to call my mom, and of course my mom didn't believe me. She told me that it was probably something I saw on my TV and was scared of, but I hadn't even witnessed anything close to this on the TV. My mom then tells me to call my sister and ask her to get home, but I just couldn't do that because she was having fun with her friend. I couldn't be that sister. Furthermore, mind you, while all of this was going on, I could just feel this thing staring at me, while still telling me to get out. I then call my sister and talk to her, and she says to go over to her friend's house. I hurried away, forgetting to lock the door because I was too scared. I was sure this thing would harm me as soon as it got the chance, and almost all the way to my sister's friend's house, I felt it following me. Out of nowhere, it just stopped. It felt like a heavy lift had been removed from my shoulders. Then around a week later I'm standing in the bathroom talking to my mom about my grandpa, who died 2 months before I was born. I asked her if he wore a lumberjack shirt all the time. She said yes. Initially, I thought, perhaps it was merely an unusual incident, but subsequently, I began to inquire about the beard and the height. She said yes to both of the questions I asked. I asked about how he was as a person, and she said he wasn't really nice and that he would always be mad. At that point I knew it was my grandpa who talked to me, but why was he that evil to me? It just didn't feel human at this point. I don't know what talked to me, my grandpa or something not human pretending to be my great-grandpa. If somebody knows who/what this was, please let me know. Unknown entity from my childhood. I'm currently 28 male. This encounter happened in Boksburg, South Africa, around 20 years ago. My younger brother, older sister, and I think 3 of my cousins, are concerned with some unknown entity or thing. I'd actually just like to figure out what it could have been, as to this day I still have no idea. It was around 20 years ago. I can't remember the exact dates this happened, but I was about 7 to 9 years old, my brother being 3 years younger and my sister and cousins all 4 years older. Our parents left us alone at my granny's house. We were all playing in the house, specifically my mother's room, as that's where the PlayStation and computer were. While playing, we all heard a loud bang coming from the roof. Obviously out of curiosity we all ran outside to see what made that sound. It sounded like a car driving into a wall. It was late in the afternoon. It could have been between 16:30 and 1800 hours. We ran out of the house into the backyard to see what made this loud noise. When we looked on the roof, we saw what was about a 7 to 9 foot monster-like thing standing in the center. It could have been bigger or smaller, bear in mind I was a kid at the time. It was a black, shadowy figure. It had 2 horns on its head and was wearing a black cloak thingy. It either spoke to us or let out a loud roar. I can't remember that part too well. Obviously frightened by this, we all ran into the house and hid away until our parents returned. For some reason the next day we had all forgotten about this, which is kind of weird. Probably a few months passed, and I remembered something about this, but it was blurry. I had asked my sister, and she said I was probably sleeping or something. Me being a kid just shrugged it off and moved on. When I was in high school, I mentioned it to some friends. They thought I was merely fabricating nonsense, and I simply moved on. Come 2020, I, my younger brother, and 2 of the male cousins from that day were sleeping over at my one aunt's house. Struggling to sleep, we talk all night to each other, and my one cousin explains something weird that happened in his childhood at my granny's house, but he didn't know if it was a dream or if it actually happened. He explains the exact same encounter. I got so excited because for the first time someone else acknowledges it. However, my brother and the other cousin can't recall this, as they genuinely can't remember. I honestly want to know what this could have been. Does anyone know what this unknown entity could have been? My first experience was in a creepy, secluded farmhouse built in the 1930s in the countryside 10 miles from Baldwin, Kansas, off Highway 59. I had my first experience, one of 2 ever, as a senior in high school. It was at this fairly secluded farmhouse from the 1930s in rural Kansas. The house was the only one on the road, which was a turnoff from Highway 59 south of Lawrence, Kansas. My buddy Adam's parents bought it to renovate, which stirred something up out there. There was this old lean-to, open front barn, and a fire pit next to the house. The lean-to gave off the worst creepy vibe. The first time I ever went out there for my buddy's birthday party, we were all around the fire pit, which was about 10 meters from the lean-to. I overheard a couple of people talking about how the lean-to was haunted. Throughout the night, groups of people would sort of mill around the lit half of the lean-to, kind of checking it out. If you walked under this one spot, you would get the worst feeling. I chalked it up to weed paranoia and bias from hearing the story, which I took as bullshit, never having had any reason to believe in the paranormal. After that party, my friends and I would go to the actual house since the living room had been finished, where we would drink beers, smoke pot, watch basketball, and grill steaks. Weird shit and a tense atmosphere every time we were out there. I would always chalk it up to being so isolated late at night and weed paranoia. My buddy whose parents owned the place also vehemently denied the stories and creepy vibe. But shit like lit embers from the grill finding their way onto the deck after we double-checked they were out, or the ceiling fan turning itself on, all that could be the weed. Finally, the last time we went out there, we didn't have any weed, just beer, and the atmosphere was the most tense ever. We watched KU play a game and got ready to leave. As we're gathering our shit, I notice a flashlight is turned on inside of this drawstring bag. Then it turns off. Then back on. And doing this a couple of times while still in the bag. I'm weirded out and tell everyone, so we start to haul out of there. My buddy has to make sure we turn off all the lights before we leave since no one will be there till Monday, and his dad's a tough guy. So we quickly turn off all the lights and start to walk down the stairs to the front door, and as we are, I swear to God the light switches at the top of the stairs all flip on. All 3 stair lights, the living room, and the dining room physically clicked on. So we freak the duck out and get out of there. My buddy won't acknowledge what happened on the drive into town. A couple of weeks later, the place burned down for unknown reasons. About 2 years after that, I'm at a college party, and I see the best friend of my buddy who owned the place. He had gone out there a couple of times with us but not during the light switch incident. So we're talking, and the subject of that house comes up. He tells me a story about how when my buddy's parents bought the place, he and my buddy went out to clear out that old lean-to. When they got there, he confirmed there was a noose strung from the ceiling out of orange wire. They took it down. They come back a few days later to do more work and find it strung right back up in the same spot. None of my encounters are particularly scary, but they are strange and paranormal. The thing that comes to mind first is from when I was really little. I was probably around 8 years old at the time. I grew up out in the country, and my parents' house was just a few hundred feet up the road from my grandma's, and we were the last 2 houses on a dead-end road. The next nearest neighbor was not even visible from either house. My grandma's faced a deep pasture with a pond in it, and our house had a horse pasture separating it from the neighbor up the road. We had the sweetest, but probably dumbest, golden retriever named Shadow. I would spend my time outside with him wandering. It was the middle of winter, and that day we went down to the pond. Mind you, most of this memory is very vivid. We were playing by the frozen pond, and he was running around on the ice when he fell through. I went to help him because, for some reason, I thought that my tiny 60-pound self could assist him. I fell in, and he got out on his own. My mom was freaking out because she had been calling for me to come up to my grandma's, and Shadow came running, but I was nowhere to be seen. I have no idea how I got out of that freezing water. The next thing I remember is being freezing and soaking wet, trudging up the hill to my mom. There was no one down there with me. Not super scary in a looking back kind of way, but I remember how terrified I was falling into that icy water and having Shadow abandon me there. Something had to have helped me out. I'm a petite girl, and even at 20 I'm only 5 feet 2 inches. While that pond isn't very deep, we weren't right next to the bank or anything. I shouldn't have been able to get out on my own, and I have no explanation for what happened. That's the only part of the memory that's missing, too. If anyone has suggestions, I'm open to hearing them. First time sharing here, and I wanted to share one of the many experiences I've had with things I couldn't explain. We moved a lot when I was growing up, all over the country and in places that ranged from young to old and had lots of history. Lived in homes with multiple floors, condemned trailer houses with no electricity or running water, and everything in between. I tell you that to tell you this, I am not unaccustomed to the unfamiliar. My childhood was split between so many homes of such a wide variety that I never had the chance to develop a fear of the unknown. The sounds and feels of a new place have never scared me until one time. We had moved to this brick and adobe house in eastern New Mexico. I was about 11 or 12 and lived there for about a week when I noticed a peculiar trend. The pantry door would rattle at the same time every night like clockwork. Honestly, it sounded like someone trying, but failing, to open the door. My bedroom shared a wall with the kitchen, so I was essentially the only one in the house that heard it, but it drove me nuts once I noticed it. I asked my dad about it, and he said how it was probably the air con and pressure differentials. That sort of thing. I didn't think anything of it, but that night I shut the air con off, set a timer, and waited. The door rattled again, like clockwork. It carried on for about half an hour or so, then stopped, and I went to sleep knowing it wasn't the air conditioning. The next day I brought this to my dad, who was understandably upset that I had shut off the AC and stayed up so late, but he was understanding of my need to know. His next theory was vibration from nearby traffic or a nearby railroad could be reaching some kind of resonance in that door frame. He was satisfied and sent me on my way. I was not satisfied. I couldn't isolate traffic and the railroad because I can't control those things. But I figured I would do another test. That night rolled around, and I shut the AC off, then opened my bedroom window and listened for the train. I knew it couldn't be traffic, it was too regular, but the train tracks were relatively close, and I knew from past experience I would be able to hear the train. The door rattled. I listened for it to stop, reset the AC, and closed my window. This time I did not tell my dad. The next night I decided a more aggressive approach was called for. Before I continue, I should point out something about this house. Like so many older homes, it had an ever so slight lean. The sort of lean where if a door is not latched, it will slowly move further open or close depending on its position relative to this unfortunate axis. The pantry door, notably, was positioned such that if it weren't latched fully, it would slowly open, rather than close. So I set an alarm and waited until it was nearly time for the rattle to start. I went into the kitchen, turned on all the lights, opened the pantry door, and sat cross-legged on the floor to wait. Sure enough, the moment came. The pantry door opened wider than it normally would have in a sharp jerking motion, and then it slammed hard enough to rattle the shelves, and it rattled harder than it had ever done before. It was like someone trying to get out of a locked room. I sat there in awe, watching the spectacle as my parents came up to see what the ruckus was, seeing the door and everything. I don't quite remember my parents' reactions. It was a whole lot of me being swept up and firmly guided to my parents' bedroom, where I was shortly joined by my sister and both parents. Over the next couple of days Dad tried replacing the hinges, adding a lock, and eventually just taking the door off altogether. Never did learn what caused it. All I can say is that we had no other strange incidents like that at that house. A series of encounters. The year was 2011, I had just moved out of my mom's house and was living with my best friend from high school. After a few months of living there, she had a habit of going into my room, jumping on my bed, or pulling my blanket off to wake me up. Well, one morning I was woken by something jumping on my bed, and I was tired, so I was trying to extend my legs out to kick her off my bed, but my ankles had an enormous amount of pressure. I couldn't move them. I felt chills go through my body, and the jumping continued, but nothing was there, and finally the pressure was released. I fell out of my bed and ran out of my apartment in my underwear. It was 7 a.m. I finally got the nerve to go back inside and walked into my room with a nervous feeling. I looked on my bed and saw 2 indentations on my blanket closely together. The crazy part about that is when I fell out of the bed, I don't think the blanket moved. It felt as if whatever had been jumping on the bed was still there, keeping the blanket in place. That's the only way I could explain to myself how I saw the mark still there. After that day, I slept in the living room and refused to go to bed at night until the sun came up, keeping the light on no matter what. That went on for 2 months. Fast forward a few months, I had some problems happen with my friend and moved back home to my old childhood room. My safe haven, that would soon change. When I moved back, I brought the same bed I had my prior encounter with. One night, as I slept facing inside of the room, I woke up to a very distinctive noise. The sound of something dragging its feet on the carpet. Something is pacing back and forth next to me, and suddenly, it is right in my face, growling and breathing heavily. Then it left my face and began to pace again and again. Once again coming back into my face and repeating. One last time in my face, and I heard the pace move away from me and stop. I didn't open my eyes once during this. A few weeks later my stepmom gave me a blessed Sacred Heart charm. She asked me to wear it and never take it off. And hugged me and said she loved me. Months later, while we were smoking outside and drinking, she asked me if anything had happened since then. And I told her no. She then told me the night before she gave me the charm, I had scared her. From her account, I came to their room around 3:15 a.m. I pushed the door open and just stood in the doorway. She woke and asked if I was okay and if I needed anything. I was mute. I stood there for a minute or so, she said. Then walked back to my room. I still to this day don't know what the duck that was. On any of these encounters. For context, The previous owner died in my mom's room. Also, my nephew would talk to someone. He was 6 at the time. I would babysit, and while I would be downstairs getting him a snack, walking back upstairs I could hear him having a full conversation with someone. I stopped short before getting to the room so I could hear more clearly, but the floorboard made a noise, and he stopped talking immediately. My sister would always say he would wave bye to someone when he would leave his room. Some nights, when it was just him and me downstairs, I would hear footsteps in their room upstairs. Well, that is my stories. I hope you enjoyed listening to my experiences. I didn't enjoy dealing with them, lol. These are 2 stories from when I was in high school. I'm 23 now, and these moments have stuck with me and are part of the reason I own white sage and periodically smudge my apartment. I have always believed in the unknown and spirits, but prior to high school, I had never truly experienced anything beyond the typical déjà vu that we all encounter from time to time. Below I have 2 stories about 2 of my own personal experiences. They are true events. Even if people are skeptical, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Believe what you want to believe, or at least what will help you sleep at night. However, before I get into them, it's probably worth pointing out that I used to use a Ouija board with one of my best friends. Stupid, I know. Enjoy my experiences. So when I was in high school, we lived in this neighborhood with an old textile mill in it. I always had a creepy vibe about the mill. I've never looked up if anything happened there because I've always been, and still am, afraid of what I will find. My bus stop used to be in front of the mill, and I had to start walking to school because I just couldn't get rid of the feeling I was being watched by someone, or something, at the mill. Now, 2 things happened after I started walking to school. 1, I started seeing a little girl, out of the corner of my eye, about 4 or 5, in the mornings as I was getting ready for school. I was the only one awake at the time, so maybe she felt comfortable appearing? I never felt threatened by her, and I don't know her name, but she looked like maybe she was from the 20s. I actually stopped seeing her after a while. It made me sad, even though her presence sent a shiver every time. The second thing that happened was that my brother and his friend decided to enter the mill, where they claimed to have found markings indicating the location of a body and dried blood. I don't know how true that is, because I refuse to go in that place, but I still can't ever shake the feeling that something is watching me. Even to this day. In fact, it seems to have intensified since my brother and his friend went in there. Apparently now it's being remodeled and reopened. I hope they cleanse the building of any negative energy and spirits first. My second story takes place a few years after the incident with the little girl. At my sweet 16. So, my parents threw me a surprise party with a luau theme. I had a few of my close friends over, some staying overnight. One of my friends, let's call them K, needed to go home, so we all decided to walk them home. I mean, they didn't live that far, maybe 2 or 3 blocks. Well, we get there, and we are all hanging out. So, Kay lived near a cemetery, and another friend, I'm going to call her Sam, suggested we just walk around. Now, it's, maybe, 9:30 at night, and this cemetery has been known to have fog only in the cemetery. The fog only affects the area inside the cobblestone walls of the cemetery. I didn't tell anyone, of course, and we all thought it would be a great idea. So we all hop over the wall, which is not that tall, and we just start walking around, looking at who's buried where. In this cemetery there is an area that has its fence, and after a while, Sam and I get a little bored and decide we want to go inside. So we did, and immediately she started feeling sick to her stomach, and we can't figure out why. So we tell everyone still in the cemetery, and we leave. The second we leave, Sam's feeling better. No nausea. No stomach pain. Nothing. Then I started feeling nauseous, which freaked me out a little. I convinced everyone to return to my house because I no longer wanted to be at that location. We told Kay goodbye and left. I didn't stop feeling nauseous until we were inside my house. I do not believe that whatever was present intended for us to be there, and I am simply grateful that the only effect was a wave of nausea. So those are my 2 stories. I hope, if anything, you find them fascinating. The night when an inexplicable sound and long shadows changed my life. For a long time, I've been interested in how sound can affect the mind and body. But it wasn't until I had a paranormal experience that I decided to devote myself to designing solfeggio frequencies. That night changed how I saw reality and made me think about the lines between the physical and the spiritual. It all started at my grandma's house in Puebla, Veracruz, Mexico, which was full of stories and memories. She spoke Nahuatl and used prayers and old remedies to heal people. One night, when I was alone in her old room, I heard a constant humming that didn't seem to come from any electronic device. The sound was deep and full of life, and soon I felt a weight in my chest that made me freeze. As the sound intensified in my ears, depriving me of any other ambient noise, I had a vision. I saw tall, shadowy silhouettes moving around the room. They did not seem threatening toward me, but their presence was undeniable. That was when I remembered that my grandmother always spoke about taking care of energy and how certain sounds could either attract or repel entities. As I looked into what had happened, I found the solfeggio frequencies. These are a group of old tones that were used in Gregorian chants and healing practices. As time went on, I started using sound generators and synthesizers to try to make these frequencies again. What surprised me was that when I exposed myself to them, I had experiences like that night, but instead of feeling scared, I felt a deep sense of peace and connection. This finding prompted me to incorporate these frequencies into meditation and healing practices. I discovered that some sounds could serve as gateways, enabling entry into altered states of consciousness. It is unavoidable to think about whether sound vibrations provide a key to the unknown. Science hasn't yet found the final answers, but ancient cultures already knew that sound could change reality. I am still learning about the power of sound and how it affects how we see things. Solfeggio frequencies are a big part of my life and my art. Whether for healing, meditation, or protection against the unknown, I firmly believe that sound is a tool with limitless potential. If you've ever felt a vibration or an unexplainable sound, it may be a sign that there's more to learn. Have you had a similar experience? My strange encounter with an old woman with pitch black eyes. In 1996 I lived in a fairly old terraced house with a cemetery at the end of the road. Cliché, I know, but it's an important detail. Nothing remarkable about the house or the area, it was just convenient for college. Anyway, I was up late one night on the PC in my bedroom, which looked out onto the street. It was about 2 or 3 a.m. For whatever reason, probably to give my eyes a rest, I wandered over to the window and looked down the road in the direction of the cemetery, although it was too far down the street for me to see, and I saw 3 people walking slowly down the road. I could see that they were quite old and appeared to be dressed in funeral clothes, which, given the hour, was weird. There were 2 women and a man. I'd put their ages at about 80, and the woman in the middle was being steadied/guided by the other woman and the man, and as they came closer, I got the impression that she was upset. My first thought was that, given their age, she had recently buried her husband, and grief had caused her to behave slightly irrationally, causing her to try to be out near the cemetery at that hour, and that the other 2 were friends/relatives trying to look after her and get her home. Anyway, it was all interesting enough for me to carry on watching as they got closer to the house. Just outside the front of the house was a street lamp. I watched them as they made their way past, but when they got to the lamppost, they all stopped, and the upset woman in the middle looked up at me and grinned. This was when things got weird. The grin became a sort of grimace, and if there was any color in her face to start with, it was now dead white. At that point I realized I was staring right into her eyes, but her eyes were pitch black. Time sort of dilated. If you've ever crashed a car, the final split second before you make impact seems to drag out as you process more information than normal in the time frame. It was that sort of thing. I'm sure we only made eye contact for a second, but it felt like several minutes as my peripheral vision faded and I felt like all I could see were these 2 black holes in her face drawing me in. Although the distance between us didn't change, she somehow felt like she was coming closer, and I was aware, although I couldn't honestly say I could see them at that point, that the 2 people with her were just continuing to look down the road as if frozen but waiting for this woman to finish whatever she was doing. I was suddenly hit with this intense feeling of dread and panic, so I threw myself on the floor. As soon as I'd broken her gaze, I felt pretty stupid that this upset old woman who clearly needed help had spooked me so badly, so I looked out the window again, and there was no sign of them. It was a longish straight road, and the house was towards the middle, so Linford Christie would have had trouble getting out of sight in the time I looked away, let alone 3 octogenarians. I'm 24 years old and sitting on a couch in a Section 8 apartment. My friend and I are guests in a woman's home. She and her 2-year-old daughter occupy the 2-floor, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment. They have no cable and very little to entertain themselves with, only old VHS tapes. I don't mind because we are there to do a job. You see, we're waiting for a ghost. For months this woman has emailed me and called me. MySpace was big back then, so she was readily messaging. The problem was, I had done my fair share of apartments, duplexes, and townhouses. More often than not, it was structural or religious conviction or just a lonely person. The woman, in her mid-20s, and her daughter were having continuous encounters with a spirit named Thomas. Always at night and with anyone who dares to stay over. The apparition appeared to be a young boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, but never spoke. I asked how she knew his name, and she said when he would throw things or wake her daughter, the 2-year-old would call out his name. Apparently, It had gotten so bad that they were desperate for help. I agreed, and we would start that night. My first instinct was to find the name Thomas. Any 2-year-old can find that name. Thomas the Train was old. But not that old. The bedrooms were up the stairs. I went through every single toy and scoured the room. Nothing. Downstairs there was a large, very old color TV with a stack of VHS tapes next to it. None of them were helpful, and I agreed to stay the night. My friend and I, business partners at the time, arrived late, around 10 p.m., and were greeted on the couch. The woman explained that her daughter would be terrorized any moment now. She had been asleep for some time. I told her that it was very common for young children that aren't getting enough sleep to have night terrors. She assured me this was not the case and proceeded to give us directions on what to do. She said when her daughter starts crying and screaming, she needs someone to enter the room and stand in the doorway. Once she sees you, she will lie back down and go to sleep. It dawned on me that this could be a very bad situation, and at that moment we were extremely uncomfortable. She begged us to stay, and we did reluctantly. About midnight her daughter woke up and started crying. Curiously, we started taking turns walking up the stairs and into the landing. There was a dim night light at the doorframe, and she would see us and go back to sleep. Clearly, we felt like babysitters. After a rapid rate of crying almost every 10 minutes, I started to get impatient. After another trip I backed up and stood in the landing where she couldn't see me and waited. I debated on turning on the lights and announcing our exit, but after 20 minutes there was no more crying. I waited maybe a couple more minutes and started to creep down the stairs. About halfway down I could see into the living room at his very annoyed facial expression, and then we heard it. Boom. Boom. Slap. And then instantly the screaming and crying. We flew up the stairs and turned on the light. The 2-year-old was in the fetal position on the bed. Her blanket was pulled tight from her chin and stretched across the bed and under it. Even as we entered the room, the blanket was still taut. The young girl's face was very red, but no fingerprints could be seen. There was no way someone of flesh and blood was in that room, other than that 2-year-old. This still gives me goosebumps today. Although I have encountered more, this was the first and the most successful case I've ever had. Stories from my childhood home with the unknown. I lived in an old mountain cabin from when I was 6 to shortly before my 15th birthday, that is to say, most of my childhood. I lived with my mom and stepdad, and at any given time we had pets. For most of the time I lived there, we had a Rottweiler named Kayla. She's important to the events that happened here. Events, so things started happening around when we moved in. The cabin is built into the side of an incline, so there's a sort of bridge from the back of the top floor of the house that you can use to get outside. This bridge is connected to what was my first bedroom there by a small balcony and a sliding glass door that didn't have a curtain. So at night, it was just this incredibly dark scene outside the door, which would scare any kid my age. Eventually, a couple years later, my mom reorganized the house and put me in the downstairs bedroom. It was warmer, being closer to the fireplace, and that move was a birthday present from my parents. This was my room for most of the time I lived there, and the room I had when my family got our dog Kayla. My parents would leave me home alone at times to go shopping or run errands, leaving me alone till 8 or 9 p.m. on my own. I didn't mind this at first, but then I eventually started to experience things when I was alone that left me afraid to be there on my own. I would hear a male and female voice calling or whispering my name, knocking, rustling, footsteps, and the like. Kayla would also suddenly start growling or barking at absolutely nothing. Note that we lived in a small mountain town, so not many cars or pedestrians went by, especially not after dark. I began to keep Kayla close, feeling that we were safer together. Eventually, my mom moved me back upstairs, this time to the front room, which had its own small balcony. Around this time, when I was 12 or 13, is when the activity became much more intense. I remember sitting in my room around sunset, reading a book of ghost stories, no less, a book that I still own, and suddenly hearing a man call my name very loudly. I was very surprised, of course, and went downstairs to ask if my parents had called me. They said they hadn't, so I told my mom what had happened, which she didn't have an explanation for. During the summer, I would camp outside near our house on my own. I can recall an instance where I had brought my DS out to my campsite with me, and after playing very late into the night and leaving my lantern on, I fell asleep with my sleeping bag only pulled up to around my waist. Right before I drifted off, I felt a warm wind blow through my tent, and I woke up in the morning completely tucked in, as if my mother had come to check on me, which my mom denied doing, and she probably went to sleep before me anyway, and my lantern was turned off. At first, I thought I had left it on and the bulb had burned out, but I was able to turn it on just fine. Back in my new upstairs room, whenever I came down the stairs, I would have a clear view down the hall to the sliding glass door I mentioned above. Usually nothing notable was out there, but I always got a bad feeling about that area. One night around dusk, my parents call me downstairs for dinner, and as I'm headed down the stairs, I see a glimpse of a woman in a big black dress pressing her hand to the glass. The main thing that scared me about her? She didn't have a face, just a skull. That event terrified me to the point that I started having Kayla sleep in my room with me. At night, I would hear whispering and footsteps that sounded like someone pacing and muttering in the living room, right beneath my bedroom. My mom told me she heard it too, being in the downstairs bedroom next to a hallway leading right to that living room. One night, shortly before I left the house, for other reasons, not the activity, I had left the curtain covering the glass door that led to my balcony open so I could see the moon and stars. I woke to the sound of Kayla growling and looked outside to see a transparent form on the balcony, kind of reminiscent of that famous photograph of the brown lady, but instead of a hooded form, it looked like the same entity that I had seen out the back door. That was my last major encounter before moving out, but the whispering and footsteps from downstairs persisted for the remainder of my time there. To this day, my mom and I agree that the house was haunted. My stepdad, however, is more of a skeptic and denies it. This still bothers me to this day. In high school, I would wake up at 5:30, while my dad would get up around 4:30. When he woke up that morning, he heard a knock at the back porch. So he went downstairs and answered the door, and it was a child around the age of 7 or 8 wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. My dad asked it what it needed. The child asked if I was awake? So of course my dad said no and went on with his morning. On the way to school, he told me what happened, and I asked him if the child was a family member from church. However, since it was still dark, he couldn't identify them. I texted the eldest child of the family, there are 6 kids, and asked him if any of them did it. None of them did. I still think of this 5 years later. The strange girl from the woods. I've always wanted to share this story to hear other people's opinions, because to this day, I'm still not entirely sure what really happened. When I was about 12 years old, I was part of a scout group. It was a lot of fun. We learned all sorts of things about nature and survival, like building simple furniture out of bamboo, lighting campfires, and working as a team. I'm not sure how scout groups work in other countries, but where I live, we often went on short camping trips in quiet wooded areas. We often stayed in peaceful spots, surrounded by trees, without any extreme activities. This particular trip took place behind an educational center that had a patch of forest out back. Since it was during school vacation, the place was closed, but they let us use their open area, a small field, to camp. It wasn't as big as a soccer field, but it was spacious enough. We set up our tents, tables, chairs, and a campfire, then started doing the usual scout activities. Each tent had 2 people, boys with boys and girls with girls. Since there were only 2 girls, my friend and I shared a tent. During our camping trips, everyone had assigned duties. One person would cook, another would collect firewood, and so on. For dishwashing, though, we took turns because we had to walk all the way to a stream a bit deeper in the woods. We always went in pairs, the same pairs as the tents. On the second night, my tent mate got sick, she had a bad cold, and it happened to be our turn to wash the dishes after dinner. It was almost midnight, and we just finished eating. Our leader told me to go with another boy instead so she could rest. I agreed and grabbed a flashlight, and he carried the box with the dirty dishes. To reach the stream, we had to take a narrow trail into the woods. It wasn't far, but since it was pitch dark and the only lights were from the moon and my flashlight, it felt much scarier than usual. That trail was the only way to get there, a thin path surrounded by trees on both sides. We followed it quietly and soon arrived at the stream. But as soon as we got there, we saw a figure standing by the water. It was too dark to make out any details, so we decided to get a little closer. Maybe it was someone from our group or from the center, but that wouldn't make sense, since it was so late. When I shined the flashlight toward the figure, I froze. It was a girl standing with her back to us, wearing the same clothes as my tent mate. I was confused. She was supposed to be asleep in the tent, sick. Why would she be here? And how could she have gotten here before us? Still, we called her name, hoping she'd turn around or answer. Nothing. She didn't move, just stood there, silently facing the water. I don't know what got into us, but we decided to get closer. I know, not the smartest idea. My friend reached out and gently touched her shoulder, turning her slightly. I pointed the flashlight at her face, and that's when both of us froze in absolute terror. The girl had no face. I don't know if it was a trick of the light, or if our minds were playing games with us, but we both saw it, or rather, didn't see it. Her face was just blank. She stayed completely still, saying nothing. We panicked, dropped everything, and bolted back to camp, screaming all the way. If it was a prank, it was a cruel one. I remember thinking she looked like one of those long-haired ghostly figures from Asian horror movies, the kind that appear near water. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, that maybe I'd watched too many scary movies. But when I saw how terrified my friend was, pale and shaking, I knew he had seen the same thing. The first thing I did when we got back was run to my tent. My heart nearly stopped when I saw my friend sleeping soundly inside, deep in sleep. That gave me chills. It definitely hadn't been her, even though the clothes were identical, or at least looked that way. Maybe I was too scared to tell the difference, but they seemed the same. I went back to find the boy, and he looked completely terrified. What had we just seen in the woods? I still don't know. Maybe it was some random person living in the area, or possibly something else. After getting scolded by our leader, we had to go back to the stream to collect the dishes we'd dropped. We were both trembling, expecting to see her again, or worse, but when we arrived, everything was quiet. No one there. No footprints, no movement, nothing. Just the dishes where we'd left them. To this day, I have no explanation. Over the years, the story turned into a bit of a joke among our old Scout friends. Everyone says we were just scared kids imagining things. But I still find it strange that two people saw the exact same thing at the same time. I'm not afraid anymore, it's been a long time. But I'd still like to understand what really happened that night. The worst part was that the girl didn't say a word or move at all, which scared me even more. Not seeing her face might have been because of the flashlight, but even so, I still have no idea what actually happened. My dad and I don't know why our house is haunted. The last few months of my life have been some of the strangest. My dad and I have come to believe our house is haunted. My dad had always been a skeptic, coming from a Jehovah family, no offense intended. I was born and raised Catholic. I was always one for believing in ghosts, and nothing has seemed to change that. I have had my fair share of paranormal experiences as a little kid, but no one ever believes you at that age. I would always have waking nightmares about a little girl chasing me through my house, and my mom often found me in the living room screaming bloody murder even though I was still asleep. I've had many cases of sleep paralysis and extremely weird nightmares. Regardless, this is something stronger than I've ever experienced before. A few months back my dad had been complaining about strange things happening, such as things going missing and being touched. My mom and I brushed it off as paranoia, as my dad was depressed and going through a crisis. But recently things have been happening to me that have no clear explanation. This all started off really strangely with someone feeding my dog a chocolate muffin. This wouldn't be as weird as it is if we even had chocolate muffins at the time. I also live nowhere near town, so there's no way he would have gotten it from there. Then came my extreme tiredness. I could easily blame this on being a senior in high school and being stressed, but it seems like no matter how much sleep I get, I'm always tired. Next is the whining and scratching at my bedroom door. The time that this happened I was already on edge for some reason I can't completely remember. I have 3 inside dogs, all of which are little dogs. I was sitting on my bed watching videos, and I kept hearing this clawing and whining at my door. I opened my door, looking down the hall to find nothing was there. All my dogs were asleep on the couch. I shut my door a little nervous and backed up and sat down on the edge of my bed. It started again, so I looked under my door only to see nothing. The scratch continued until my mother came home 15 minutes later. Today I came home from staying at my best friend's house and was told by my 6 feet 7 inches, 200-something pound dad that he was almost pulled out of bed by some unknown force. To top that off, I was washing my hair, and I heard a loud banging on my bathroom door. Thinking it was my mom, I opened it only to find nothing. I don't know why this is happening. Maybe someone unintentionally brought something home from somewhere. I just need an explanation. The night the shadows found me. This experience happened in a calm period after a very, very turbulent period in my life. My best friend's mother died of a long illness almost 2 years to the month after my father. Her passing really shook up the entire family, eventually leading to its splintering and major mental issues for all involved. She was the glue that held her family together through the trials of life. Her daughter was my best friend. Despite us being 2 different personalities, we got along so well her mother made sisters' shirts for us and took me in for an entire week while my dad was in the hospital. I miss Ms. Debbie so much. When she got sick, her family, in my opinion, didn't even fight for her. She ended up dying in a cluttered, dirty home on the floor in front of a couch she had lived on for a year. The mess was horrible. It was so bad that it took myself, a family friend, and constant prodding to their son and daughter a few weeks to clean up. So, it's not the most friendly atmosphere to pass in. I can't remember how long after her passing this takes place, but the house had been cleaned, reorganized, and sanitized after she passed. I was hanging out with her son, let's call him D, and his girlfriend, let's call her A, both of whom I was/am still close to. I had long ago lost contact with my old best friend due to her mental issues after her mom died.
D, A, and I were house sitting for D's father, who was out of town.
We weren't doing anything rowdy, just one shot of Jack for me and several shots for them while we watched Lake Placid. After the movie finished, they offered me my old best friend's room. I couldn't deal with all the memories that entailed, which I relayed to D and A and politely declined. The couch was good enough for me. They said, "See you in the morning," and trotted off to their bedroom. I curled up on the couch, got snugly under my blanket, and quickly fell asleep around 2 a.m. at the latest. I felt like I was choking. Sputtering, gasping for air, I was snatched out of sleep right at the hazy gray break of dawn by some unknown, powerful force wrapped around my neck. As I clawed and grasped to make sure no errant string or corner of the blanket had wrapped itself around my throat while I slept, my eyes adjusted to the pre-dawn light in the living room. I could make out a black figure, hazy around its outline but still very solid, with what looked like an arm outstretched and wrapped around my neck. I tried calling for A, but, from my perspective, nothing came out. After what felt like an eternity, I gathered my wits about me and declared in my mind, I am a human. I control all that happens in my mind, and I deny that this is happening. You have no power here. The figure dropped me like a prey animal that had just lashed out at its predator. It walked/glided from the side of the couch, went around the coffee table to the right of it, and moved to the doorframe that led into the kitchen. It stopped at the doorframe, seemed to smile in my direction, and walked through to the kitchen. Not knowing what else to do, I promptly passed right back out. After the others had awoken and we had breakfast, I confided in them the strange events of that dusky dawn. "Oh, that's what that was," I said. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I thought I heard you calling out my name, but I was half asleep, so I paid no mind to it." My thoughts on what happened: I don't think it was my best friend's mother. She was very religious in her own right, and while I was barred from seeing her in her last days, I feel confident she would have passed on. She may have lingered for a while, perhaps a few days, but before we stopped talking, my best friend mentioned that her mother had gotten everything ready, bills straightened, will written, clear instructions left, etc., for her departure. Ms. Debbie wouldn't have stayed around for longer than a few months at that. No, I think whatever attacked me was the feelings that were poured into that house, the uncaring, the apathy, the hoarding, and the carelessness that took place before and after her death manifested against someone who remembered it better. And we all know the dark does not like the light, Any other insights are greatly appreciated. This is really my only paranormal encounter, but it was enough to last a while. I am writing about my mom's experience as a teenager on the res. Hi, I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but I'm not sure why. So I figured I'd share here. This is what I've been told by my mom, aunts, and uncles on separate occasions, and the story has never changed, which is why I choose to believe it. My mom, we'll call her Molly, grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation until she moved to Rapid City when she was about 15, I believe. From her age, this happened in the early to mid-80s. She had a boyfriend at the time who, from what I remember, still lived on the res. His father was recently diagnosed with cancer, and he asked her to come to a UYP ceremony with him for his dad. Molly had told her mom that she was going to a UYP, and she was told she wasn't ready and wasn't mature enough to handle it. So, as all teenagers do, she took that as a challenge and went anyway. Before the ceremony began, a bowl was being passed around, a sacred stew. Molly took a piece out and ate it. The ceremony began, and everyone was asked to close their eyes. Molly kept her eyes closed only halfway through the ceremony. When she opened them, she claims to have seen balls of light varying in size flying around. That's when she ran out. After the ceremony, Molly's boyfriend followed her out. She told him what happened, and she went home after finding out the sacred stew was dog and throwing up. When she got home, she was in tears and told her mom what happened, and Molly was laughed at. Lol, she got an "I told you so," and that was that. My aunts and uncles say they saw a change in her after this. My mom claims it opened her up spiritually or something. My dad just says he thinks it's the reason she is the way she is. But all of that being said, I think it definitely left some kind of mark on her, because the same, unchanged story has been told to me 25 to 30 years after the fact by different people. Moral of the story: don't open your eyes during a UYP or any ceremony where the spiritual leader tells you to keep your eyes closed for that matter. A strange encounter. I am a mechanical process design engineer holding a senior position in a huge multinational company that manufactures equipment for other engineering companies. I travel internationally frequently and regularly present at conferences, as I am well respected, and published, in my chosen field, and I absolutely cannot risk the ridicule of my peers by publicly discussing this incident. I can pinpoint the date of this incident precisely. It was Friday 21st of June 2002, and it was around 10 a.m. At the time I was a student at a university in the north of England, and I was home for the holidays. That morning England played Brazil in the World Cup, and I was up very early to watch the game. After England was eliminated, I was very disappointed and decided to go for a run in the hills above the house that my parents lived in at the time. This was a route I regularly took and took me through a mixture of the villages around the farm that my parents owned, along a canal, before slowly climbing up and into the hills via a series of woods. The total amount of time this took me was around 1 hour and 30 minutes, dependent on conditions. That morning was very warm, summer was in full bloom, and the sky was a beautiful clear blue without a cloud to be seen. Having made my way along the canal, I joined a main road for a distance of around 400 meters before reaching a turning, onto a dirt track, that leads from the main road through a wood into a clearing, essentially a meadow, that ultimately leads directly to a cobblestone road that is the remnant of an old pack road across the hills between Manchester, Halifax, and Leeds. As I left the main road and entered a wooded area, I felt a sense of being watched. This was not unusual, as the area is a mecca for dog walkers, hikers, and the like. I emphasize that at this point nothing untoward or odd had occurred, I just felt that someone else was there in the woods. I carried on running at my established cadence, a gentle 1-2, 1-2, and began the gentle ascent to the open meadow area. The track through this grassland is a dusty dirt track. The meadow itself is shaped like a rectangle with a width of around 10 meters and a length of around 150 to 175 meters. The meadow is enclosed by trees on all four sides, and when approached from the main road, you have hills to your front and left, with a wooded descent to your right, which leads to the main road before again more hills appear around 100 meters away. As I entered the meadow, I could see that the path ahead was empty. There was a very gentle hum of flying creatures, bees, etc., and some bird calls, but other than that, there was no noise and no sight of any other humans. I had made my way perhaps 25 meters into the space when I caught from the corner of my vision a sharp movement in the treetops to my immediate right. I cannot describe why it appeared unnatural, but the movement drew my immediate attention. I dropped from a run to a walk and turned to look directly at the origin point of the movement. I then observed a very tall tree around 25 meters from me, which was around 5 meters tall. Suspended very close to the top of the tree was a shiny, metallic cylinder with a bright white light along the surface pointing towards me. The cylinder was approximately 2.5 meters in length with a diameter of approximately 75 to 100 centimeters. At the top of the cylinder was a dome that had a yellowish glow. Halfway up its length, the cylinder had two extended and levered appendages on the ends of which were what appeared to be clamps of some description with which it was holding onto the branches of the tree. As I took note of this object, my walk dropped until I was still. I rubbed my eyes twice and elected to move towards the tree in which the object was suspended. When I was within around 5 meters, I felt unable to move. The cylinder dipped towards me, and I had an overwhelming sensation that I had interrupted something at work and that I had seen something that I was not supposed to see. I remained rooted to the spot, and the cylinder retracted its appendages. It appeared to rotate through 180 degrees, and it descended to the approaching ground level and then moved towards me. As it came to around 2 to 3 meters of me, I could see my body reflected in its surface. The light on the centerline of the object became brighter, and I confess that at this point I felt that I was being scanned. I use the word memorized when I think about this event. I was being memorized. I felt that all my thoughts and memories up to that point in my life had been scooped up in the cylinder. The object then, without any kind of sound, lifted off the ground and shot off at an extremely high velocity out of the clearing in the direction away from me. It remained in my view until it was out of the clearing, and I clearly recall that it clipped a treetop as it was exiting. After it was out of my sight, I immediately felt free to move again. I made my way back to my parents' house, where I remained for several hours. I was not afraid, I was just fundamentally moved by the encounter. I have absolutely no explanation for what I saw and experienced. I offer this only as a description of an event that has absolutely changed my life. I feel as if I encountered an entity of sentient probe that day, that I was somehow altered by the experience, and also that this object did not expect me to be in the clearing that day. Thank you for listening, apologies for its length. I actually feel so relieved to have finally written this down into a single piece. Experience with the entity. I've had many experiences with ghosts. However, one that is ingrained in my mind until this day happened when I was just 5 years old. I'm now 24. My sister was just under a year old and shared a room with me in her crib right across from me in our bedroom. On her side of the room was a box TV that was playing SpongeBob since we liked to sleep with a little noise. On the other side of the room, parallel to us, we had a walk-in closet that was cracked open. I was lying in my bed, which had a white, see-through canopy curtain. For some reason my eyes shifted to the closet. I saw a shape, so I slowly pulled back the canopy curtain. I then saw that it wasn't just a shape. I saw one of the clearest apparitions I've ever seen in my entire life. Sitting crisscross on the floor, with matted dark hair and scared wide-open teary eyes, with one of my bedsheets draped over her hooding her head, with the most scared and distraught look on her face, was a woman. She stared into my soul. I didn't know what to do. I froze in fear and kept eye contact. Mind you, this is my first encounter. I thought there was an actual unknown human woman in our house. My sister stood up in her crib and started whining. I got up looking at the woman the whole time. She didn't move an inch. I picked up my sister as I walked out of the room. Her head finally moved, watching me line the room and head to the door. I went to my mom's room and told her that there was a woman in the closet. When we went to check, there was nothing. The sheet was in the corner of the closet on the floor. It still gives my mom and me chills to this day because I described her appearance in vivid detail when I was so young. I will never get that frightened look and wide open eyes out of my head ever. I always wonder, what was she afraid of? Why was she crying? Why did she show herself to me? Was she reaching out for help, or did she have a sinister reason to reel me into the closet? I'll never know. Who, or what, did I meet last summer? This was in the summer of 2024 in Massachusetts, either the second to last or the last Saturday of July. I'm big into foraging, and it was a great year, with a perfect balance between rain and sun compared to the unbearably wet summer the year prior. For context, I live in a neighborhood that borders conservation land, so I wasn't going somewhere to hike/forage. I literally just walked into my backyard and kept on walking. I was out with one of my dogs. She's good off leash and loves to just run around while I pick mushrooms and overturn logs. We had been out for several hours, and she was beginning to feel warm, so we headed toward a stream approximately 1.5 miles, trail distance, behind my house. This stream is an offshoot of a much bigger river near me, but as long as there hasn't been a ton of recent rainfall, the flow of the water is slow and tempered, and she can run around on the rocks and cool off. I sat along the edge of the stream. It was buggy but not unbearable, and I only got bitten by a few mosquitoes before I heard splashing coming from upstream. My dog stops jumping around in the water and stares in the same direction. For a split second I got nervous thinking it was a bear or a moose that frequents the area, but nope. Just somebody making his way up the stream. While I had seen people back there before, it was definitely not the norm. I've lived here for 7 years, and I've seen less than 5 people out there in that time. To describe him, he was in fly fishing pants, the dark green ones that are boots up to suspenders, but underneath he had on one of those Life is Good brand shirts. I only noticed because I have an ungodly number of those in my own closet, and a tan bucket hat with the drawstring tightened a bit. He was sort of red in the face, but I figured it was a mixture of the heat and a bit of a sunburn since it looked like he'd been at it all day. He was also quite old. Wrinkled from decades in the sun like a farmer would be, with a full short white beard, and I'm sure under the bucket hat would be more white hair. He was old enough that I didn't feel immediately uncomfortable being alone in the middle of nowhere with just a dog. I had a knife on me, and he was moving slow. I know that sounds ridiculous to remember, but if you know, you know. My dog is usually iffy with strangers, not aggressive but timid. If she gets nervous, she tries to take off, but he walked right up to her, offered a hand for a sniff, and she jumped around all excited like she wanted to play. Not that this hasn't happened before, just not typical for her. He says, "Just passing through," laughs at my dog having her zoomies through the water, and adds, "Seems like you're just passing through, too." I don't remember much of the exact language of the conversation, but that specifically I remember. We chatted for a bit as he started fly fishing again, with that repetitive back and forth casting motion, and my dog was particularly interested. He asked what I was doing out that way. I told him foraging. I didn't really feel like I had anything to hide, and I can't explain why I even told him. I don't understand why I felt comfortable talking to him, but there was something about him that just made me feel at ease. It felt as if there was nothing to worry about, not only regarding him but also in a strange existential way. Again, I know that sounds ridiculous, but the feeling was encompassing, and I have seldom felt that comfortable around anyone, let alone a stranger. We didn't exchange names, and we didn't talk about where we came from. We just shared a mutual love of nature and some tidbits about our respective hobbies. He asked normal questions like if I'm worried I'll eat a mushroom that'll kill me, how I got into it, and all that. The same questions I usually get when someone finds out I forage. At some point he stopped casting and pointed in the direction down the river in the direction he was headed and mentioned seeing some real weird looking mushrooms along the stream and that they seemed to want moisture because they were really close to the water line, but he wasn't sure what kind they were. And he says something along the lines of not everything is meant for you, but you look like you knew that already. I didn't respond to that because I was unsure of what to say, but he continued with a remark like, you look like you care about this place just as much as I do. I said something back, like how it's an act of love to protect things you care about. He nodded, like I passed some test in his head, and he said good. I stood up at some point along the stream edge, and I was standing within a few feet of him, and I can't emphasize enough, I don't know why I did that. Stranger danger, at my grown age. I know better. At no point did I feel the need to put distance between us, to call my dog to me, or to tell him to have a good day and continue on my way. I just sat there for who knows how long, talking to this old man about mushrooms. I know that people will know what I mean when I say this, but all of a sudden, everything was quiet. It was as if someone had suddenly muted a TV. No birds, no hum of cicadas and crickets and bees, no wind, only the white noise of the stream. My dog stopped, her ears perked up and her tail upright, but her hair wasn't bristled or anything like she was angry. Just alert. The guy looks at me and goes, "It's time for you to go back now," and before I could question him, he repeats himself, a little more firm, "It's time for you to go back now," and he pushed my chest with 2 fingers, like a peace sign, tips of his fingers. And then I woke up. But not startled? I don't even clearly remember opening my eyes. It was like I was already awake but just became conscious. A really weird sensation. My dog was just standing in the water, completely nonplussed. All the sound was back, my feet were wet, and my chest hurt right where he pushed, but nothing else. I've talked to only a handful of people about this experience. The general vibe has been that I was at the right place and the right time where the veil was thin and I met some sort of otherworldly being. A protector of the forest of sorts. However, I am sharing this here to gather some thoughts on this experience. I anticipate that people will ask. I was not under the influence of anything. I was completely sober. I hadn't felt ill before or after this. I had eaten lunch already. I do not eat anything that I forage while I'm out in the woods. I have no underlying health conditions. This is not the only weird experience I've had in this forest. What did I experience? In 2012, age 15, female, I went on a trip with my mother and local church group. We went to WV to help fill food pantries in 3 churches. At the first church we stopped in, we were warned, especially women and children, not to wander off because it was a violent area that had been struck with a lot of tragedy. The church had an upper addition to allow families who were victims of mudslides or foreclosure to stay in. This addition was 2 rooms full of bunk beds, dust, and a bathroom I desperately needed. Upon our arrival and being led into the church, I rushed up to this upstairs bathroom full speed before anyone else could get to it, crossing through both rooms as fast as possible, not even bothering to turn on the light because there was light coming through the shuttered windows at the ends of the rooms. After going to the single, residential-style, bathroom, I was walking calmly back towards the stairs, having already crossed through the room nearest the bathroom, when I felt like something was watching me. I grew up in the woods and knew how it felt when a coyote or fox was close by and keeping an eye on me. I looked towards the other end of the now surprisingly dark space and saw what looked like eyes well above my head height before suddenly being pushed to the floor. I made a panicked yell out for help when one of the older men from our home church came up to check on me. As he ran up the stairs, I was released from whatever was holding me down, and he helped me to my feet, asking if I'd tripped. I was so shocked and stunned I couldn't answer him, and I ran out of there so fast and never went back to that area the rest of the trip. Later on that evening, one of the older women suggested she may go up to use the shower, and I told her, my mother, and several others what happened, and we all agreed to stay out of that space and inform the church pastor in the morning and to just use the facilities in the sanctuary where we would be sleeping for the night. The following morning, the pastor mentioned that they hadn't had anyone staying up there in quite some time since the last guests had complained about feeling cold and drafty up there, even with space heaters and blankets, and he was sure it was my imagination playing tricks on me after the long ride. Unknown. My sister and I are playing and telling jokes. Then our mom enters our room. She is looking so pale. I ask her if she is okay. She told us she didn't feel well in her room, she felt like someone was staring at her, so she agreed to sleep with us. My dad was not at home at that time. I was 11 at that time, and my brother was 16. We started teasing our mom and laughing together until I stood up to scare them. I look towards the door and say, "He is coming. He is here, and he is opening the door." The door opens by itself. Actually, the door was not closed, and then it opened because of air, I think. 3 of us freak out, but then we burst out laughing, because we think it's an error and a coincidence too. After a few days, my sister and I were talking about the same incident and laughing at that situation. But suddenly we hear a proper knock on the door. We were in that room for more than an hour, and except for us, there is no one in the house, but my sister told me it must be our cat. That's why I went to open the door, but, the door was locked from the inside. That makes us so scared. But I'd what was going on in my sister's mind. She took the keys and opened the bathroom door, and there was no one in there, not even our cat. We held each other's hands and ran out of our house and stayed at our neighborhood house until our parents were back. A series of strange occurrences in an apartment with a very dark unknown presence. This event took place in Germany in the summer of 2017. I was on holiday with my family, parents and younger brother, and we were due to stay in a small apartment for a few days near Lake Constance. After a long journey from England, we arrived at the destination, a small guest house with a few rooms and a separate apartment complex. As we arrived late, the kitchen had closed, and we didn't have any food with us, so we had to skip dinner. We then went over to our apartment to unpack and rest for a bit. Nothing seemed off about the apartment at first glance. Everything seemed to be in order, and it didn't seem to have any bad vibe at all. I did notice, however, that the cable connecting the TV to the wall had been severed, almost like something had chewed through it. I didn't think too much of it, as the TV was quite small and there probably wasn't too much in the way of decent channels. Once we had unpacked, we went to the bar around the corner that was open late for a couple of drinks. My brother and I had left our phones at the apartment, so I went back to retrieve them from the safe. This is when things began to get a bit strange. I went over to the safe to get the phones. I had operated the safe before and knew the code and how to open it. This time, however, it wouldn't open. I entered the code and pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. I kept repeating this, and nothing happened. While doing this, I began to get the feeling that someone was standing behind me. Every time I turned around, no one was there. I was then overcome with this dizziness and an almost electric feeling, as if I was being pumped full of electricity. It occurred for a few seconds, all the while I felt as if I couldn't move and that someone was behind me. The feeling wore off, and I looked around to see nothing there. I tried the safe again, and it opened. I went back to the bar and told my family what had happened. They were a bit taken aback and didn't know what to make of it. We all returned to the apartment just before midnight, and that's when things began to get weirder. There were 2 bedrooms in this apartment. My brother and I were sharing one room, and my parents were in the double bedroom. My brother complained that he felt sick and went to go sleep with my parents. A few minutes later he was being violently sick in the toilet. My mum was panicking because of the amount of sick he was retching up. More horrifyingly, the color of this sick was jet black. He hadn't eaten much that day, and he didn't consume anything of that color. He immediately felt better after the ordeal, and we all went to bed. Being someone who believes in the supernatural but also being fairly rational, I tried my best to reassure myself that there was probably a logical explanation for all of this. This was made difficult, however, by the events that followed. Despite the windows being open, my room felt unnaturally hot. The outside temperature wasn't particularly warm, so I found this somewhat strange. Seeing as I couldn't sleep, I decided to go on my phone for a bit. The Wi-Fi, which had been fine earlier, didn't seem to work. Most of the electrics seemed to work 1 minute and not the next. Could have been faulty wiring maybe, but something seemed off to me. I put my phone on charge and sat at the table across the room from me. The overhead lamp didn't work at first, but after flipping the switch a few times, it eventually turned itself on. I grabbed the pen and paper that was on the table and began writing out football scores. Not something I would usually do, but I was bored and didn't know what else to write. After about 5 minutes of doing this, the light began to flicker. I didn't worry about it too much and carried on writing. What happened next I will never forget. I began to feel overcome by this peculiar energy, an electric feeling similar to what I had experienced earlier on that night. I was unable to move, and I couldn't take my eyes off the piece of paper I had been writing on. The electric energy surged through my body, and everything around me became blurred out as all my attention was focused onto the paper in front of me. The writing and numbers that I had written onto the piece of paper slowly began to turn into a foreign language. The writing was Latin-looking and was like nothing I had ever seen before. I believed that it was Gothic script, a script that is hundreds of years old and was used in Western Europe. It was a surreal experience. I don't know how long the ordeal lasted, but it seemed like an eternity. I was dazed and confused. I didn't know what to do with myself, so I went back to bed. After a few hours of sleep, I woke up to the sound of low-pitched growling. Thinking I was half asleep, I gave myself a few seconds to adjust. I realized I was fully awake and could still hear the noise. It sounded like it was coming from under the bed. I hid under the covers, trying desperately to control my breathing and not freak out. This growling did not sound like that of a dog, it sounded like something unknown, inhuman maybe. I was now starting to realize that there was no real explanation for any of this activity. This place must be haunted by something, possibly dark, and it wanted us out of there. That's when I felt air blowing on my feet, which were exposed, sticking out from under the sheets. I froze, hoping that my mind was playing tricks on me in my paranoid state. I was wrong. Warm, damp air was being blown onto my feet. It was unmistakable. It felt as if a dog was sitting at the end of my bed, breathing heavily onto my feet. I curled up into a ball and hid myself under the covers, hoping that it would stop. During the early hours, I heard what sounded like barking coming from right outside my window. The windows were open in my room, and this was a ground floor apartment. Eventually, I plucked up enough courage. I grabbed my phone, put the torch on, and ran to the window to see what was outside. I could still hear the barking and growling as I approached the window. As soon as I looked outside, the noises ceased. It couldn't have been a dog, because not only did it not sound like one, it also stopped as soon as I shone my phone torch outside. It would not have had time to get out of sight, as there was nothing to hide behind. Once again, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around and shone my torch around the room hoping to catch something, but I couldn't see anything. It was now about 4 in the morning, and I just wanted to go to sleep. I was scared, but I was also getting irritated. I got back in bed and went off to sleep. When I woke up it was late morning. Everyone else was awake. I asked them if they heard any weird noises coming from my room, and they said they didn't. My mom, however, heard a growling and barking coming from the back of the apartment, similar to what I had heard. She said she thought it was probably a dog and went back to sleep. She said she also heard music coming from outside the window. A creepy, melodic sounding tune being played on a string instrument of some sort. Everyone was growing tired of the place, and we all decided it was best to leave and find somewhere else to stay. My brother was still a bit traumatized from his ordeal the night before. He was also alarmed by what I had experienced and didn't want to stay another night. The staff back at the main guest house weren't happy we were leaving and demanded we pay the full price. My dad argued that the place was in a bad state, considering the appliances weren't working properly. He didn't mention the strange activity, though. We eventually left that afternoon and found a new place to stay for the remainder of our trip. This place was a bed and breakfast and was much nicer. We were happy to just be away from that other place. Unfortunately, the rest of the trip didn't go to plan. My dad became ill and was in bed with a fever for a couple of days. He said that it was like nothing he did before and would have these hallucinations of the previous place we'd stayed at. He also heard creepy voices talking to him. This subsided once the fever disappeared, and he made a full recovery almost instantly, which was weird. On the journey home my mom was also violently sick. Worryingly, this sick was black, the same color as my brother's. I then began to feel really sick on the final part of the journey as we got back to England. Not long after we got back to our house, I had to run to the bathroom and was sick rather violently. This meant that all 4 of us had now been ill since staying at that apartment. I don't know what type of entity was lurking in that apartment we stayed in, but it sure as hell wasn't friendly. I try and convince myself that it wasn't demonic in nature, however, it's hard to think of what else it could have been or what it could have done if we'd stayed longer. My family is just as creeped out by this, as are the other people we have told. The only thing that is certain is that we will never be returning to that place ever again. If you're from the Louisiana/Mississippi area, you've most likely heard of Percy Quinn State Park. I can never find any articles related to this, and everyone I tell about my experience thinks I'm lying. So the one and only paranormal experience I've ever had was when I was around 11 or 12. I was on vacation at a well-known state park in Mississippi, Percy Quinn, with a good friend of mine's family. We, as 2 young boys do, broke off from the adults and went exploring the woods. About half a mile into the woods from our campsite, a main road cuts through the trees, and on the other side is what I thought to be an apartment complex, but I never confirmed it. We had just sat down on a fallen tree, and my friend was talking, but I wasn't listening. I was peering across the road at the apartment complex. For some unknown reason, I couldn't take my eyes away for maybe a minute. Then all of a sudden, by a barbecue pit someone had placed in front of the apartments, I saw a pair of white pants appear. Stay with me now. Moments later a white shirt appeared, then subsequently bare feet at the bottom of the pants, then arms, and then a brown-haired man's head appeared. I would say it was a good 70 feet away from me, but I felt rather than saw his eyes staring at me. He leaned over to the right, seeming to get a better look at me. And without malice or anger, he smiles. Just smiles at me and then waves a hand in greeting. Like I said, there was nothing menacing about the apparition, but the fact that he seemed to materialize before my eyes, coupled with him looking directly at me and acknowledging me, was enough to terrify me. I instantly jumped up with more fear than I had ever felt. My friend chased me down and asked me what happened, and he didn't believe what I told him. I refused to go back to try and see it again. I don't know what this apparition could have been and have never heard anything else about it from anyone. Just wondering if anyone in that area ever had the same experience as me. Weird experience I had. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share a strange experience I had when I was younger that still confuses me to this day. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, there was a small grocery store just down the road from my house called Willows Park Grocery. I recently did some digging and found out that it's actually one of the oldest grocery stores in the area. We'd always known the owners of the store, regardless of who they were. A married couple, Karen and Bruce, ran the store at the time, renovating the interior and maintaining a close relationship with our family. We were close enough that they'd let me go behind the counter or even hang out in the back room occasionally. But one day, Karen told my mom and me that she'd been having some weird experiences. She thought it might be a ghost. I, being a little kid, who fully believed in ghosts, and still kind of does, was obviously freaked out but curious. I asked her what was going on, and she genuinely seemed unsettled. The details are a bit fuzzy now, but I remember her saying she kept hearing strange noises from the back, cupboards closing on their own, dishes randomly falling. Her husband, Bruce, didn't believe in ghosts at all. He thought it was probably just the wind, especially since they had windows open and a fan going in the back. But Karen seemed pretty sure something else was going on, and she actually brought me back there to show me. We were only back there for maybe 5 minutes when a bolted to the wall chalkboard suddenly fell straight down to the ground. I screamed and bolted out of there, totally panicked. Karen followed me to the front, and we told my mom and Bruce what happened. Both of us were seriously spooked. I don't remember much after that, but that moment stuck with me. Now, to be fair, they did have windows open, but I don't remember the fan being on, and it wasn't even a windy day. And how does wine knock down a bolted-in chalkboard? Maybe the screws were loose? But the timing of it all felt far too coincidental. Another thing that always gave me chills was this old photograph they had hanging in the store. It was from the 1930s, showing a group of people standing outside the shop. But there was one girl in the very center of the photo who looked weirdly blurry, like out of place. It gave me a weird feeling every time I walked past it. And here's something even stranger. A few years ago, maybe 3? A man named Isan Asker bought the store from Karen and Bruce. He renamed it Yumbrosia. But just a year after taking over, he died unexpectedly of a heart attack. In the shop. What? I don't know if any of this means anything, but it still creeps me out to this day. I wanted to share this experience to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. Strange encounter. Explanation? Okay, so, this happened about 5-ish years ago. For reference, I'm 17 right now, and it was just about early winter, so late November into early December. I was still walking home after school at this point, and typically I would walk home with my brother, but he had gone home earlier that day because he got to go out with my dad on a trip for his birthday. Anyway, I was walking home alone, and it was freezing outside. It was the kind of cold that has a bite in it, so I was walking pretty fast. It was pretty windy out also, and I lived in a suburban neighborhood, so the wind was making wind chimes and trees make noise. And I vividly remember when I turned on a rather secluded street that my house was on, everything just stopped. The wind wasn't blowing anymore, and I couldn't hear my footsteps as well. It was like I just stepped into a bubble of silence. That's when I heard a strange noise coming from one of the taller hedges on my side. The noise was deep, almost guttural. Whatever was making the noise was making it rhythmically. It didn't sound like a human was making that noise, but I didn't have any other explanation, so I assumed it was one of the neighbor kids playing a trick on me. I should mention that I had never been in that house before nor recognized anybody living in that house. Anyway, I wasn't afraid at this point, but I was cold, and I wanted to go home, so I sighed loudly and said, "You got me," in a playful tone. That's when I heard the noise suddenly stop, and the hedge started to shake, almost like someone was climbing out of it. That's when all of a sudden I had a really bad feeling about all of this. I couldn't pinpoint exactly why I felt so uneasy, but I was certain that I wanted to go home that second. I think that's when my fear response finally kicked in, and I booked it all the way back to my house. While I was running, I managed to sneak one look back at the hedge, and I noticed an extremely tall woman-like figure looking back at me. It scared the hell out of me. Once I got home and shut the door, I completely forgot about it and went on with the rest of my day. I didn't see it again until a few weeks later when I went up to my aunt's house to animal sit for them. They live quite literally on the side of a mountain, so it was quite a trek getting up there and getting back down, not to mention I had no cell service. Anyway, I was only going to be up there for the weekend, and considering I was only 12, I didn't have my own car, so I had to rely on my parents solely for driving me up and down there. My parents, being the reasonable people they are, said that they would drop me off there Friday afternoon, and I could just stay up there with the animals until Sunday morning, when they'd come and pick me up. My aunt's house was surrounded by thick forest and trees. I didn't think much of it, so I agreed to the terms, and soon Friday arrived, and my parents drove me up. It was on the car ride up that I suddenly had a very bad feeling again. I didn't want my parents to think I was too immature for a task like this, so I kept my feelings to myself. When we arrived at the house, my parents stayed with me for an hour or two just to make sure that I would be all right up here and that I knew what to do with all of the animals after they left. I did my duties with the animals and started to relax as it was already starting to get a little dark. The first night there wasn't anything unusual. I was just uncomfortable being in a place that wasn't my home, but things started to get weird on Saturday night. My duties with the animals included me walking down the side of the mountain to check on the horses every morning and night and taking the dogs with me so that they could get their exercise. My plan was to try and walk down the side of the mountain just before the sun started setting and be on my way back up just as the sun was going past the horizon. Unfortunately, I wasn't anticipating how long it would take me to feed and groom the horses, so by the time I was on my way back up to the house, it was already pitch black outside. I was already paranoid and freaked out. I hate the woods, so I was almost running back up the mountain just to get inside sooner. It was just as I managed to get about 3/4 of the way up when I felt that familiar silence again. Assuming nothing of it at first, I continued on my way but subconsciously put a little more pep in my step. It was then that I heard rustling around me, and that caused the dogs to start growling and barking at something in the tree line. It was then that I started hearing that rhythmic noise again. I was absolutely horrified. I couldn't get my legs to move. It was like my body was locked in place, focusing on the area that the noise was coming from. I don't know what happened, but suddenly I was able to regain my strength, and I ran all the way back up to the house with the dogs following me and still barking behind me. Just as I managed to get inside and lock the door, I heard a gentle noise scraping on the door. I remember feeling so afraid that I wanted to cry. But I forced myself to look through the peephole on the door, and that's when I saw the same woman from a couple of weeks prior. I remember seeing her long black hair that stretched all the way past her waist and her pale skin that looked as if she hadn't seen the sun in her entire life. But the most horrifying characteristic that she had was her long black fingernails, gently scraping against the door. She was so tall that I couldn't see her face. That was until she leaned down to meet my gaze in the peephole. It felt as if she was staring right through me. That's when I heard her suddenly say, "Hello, is anyone in there? I've had an accident, and I need help." Her voice was so weak and frail that it seemed like she hadn't spoken for many years. I don't know if it was my fear that kept me held in place or my growing suspicion of the woman, but I didn't budge from the door. I think she could sense that I wasn't moving, so she said, "I know someone's in there, please come out and help. I don't have much time." I again did not move once she realized that I wasn't going to come outside. She started banging on the door with her fist and screaming. I felt so scared that I sank down with my entire body weight pressed against the door and covered my ears with my hands and cried. I stayed like that for what felt like hours until finally the banging stopped. After her, I felt brave enough to take my hands off my ears. I could hear her whisper one final thing. I'll never forget what she said to me. "Eye of God, heart of man." I had absolutely no idea what she meant by that, but I didn't hear her again afterwards. After that, I remember, I fell asleep in front of the front door and woke up to my parents knocking on the door to pick me up. I was so afraid that I didn't even open the door for them for a while. I didn't tell them anything because I didn't want them to think I was going crazy, so we left, and I haven't been back to my aunt's house since, and I've never seen the woman again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. I know it's long, but I wanted to make it detailed. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to it, and I hope this brings comfort to someone. My story. Frankly, I'm not sure if this is even the right place to share such a thing, but this has been on my chest for quite a while now, so I'd appreciate it if you could hear out my vent and give your advice. Honestly, I have been struggling with the question of life and death since the time I was born. The funny thing is, though, I can remember the moment I popped into existence better than I remember my life. It's like it was literally yesterday. My first ever memory, I believe, was the color gray or white. I think it was a bright flash of light, but I also think it was gray or something, sort of the color you get when you look at a petri dish under a microscope. The second was darkness. I was floating around in what I would personally call space, but there weren't any astronomical objects, no lights, and no stars, and I distinctly remember my first thoughts: where am I? What is this? Is this what death is like? What language am I speaking? How am I thinking? What the hell is this? Before I could finish that last question, I tried breathing but couldn't. Even though I didn't need to, so I started panicking as suddenly I started to feel like I was moving with increasing speed outside of my will. I began seeing lights that looked like stars from the night sky pass by me as if I was moving way faster than the speed of light. After I don't even know how much time, but it felt like seconds or a minute passed, I suddenly just hit Earth. It was literally like hitting something in a car crash or on a roller coaster, except that I didn't feel anything. Everything just suddenly became dark, not the same type of dark like when I popped into existence, but the same as the transition when you go to sleep. I remember having a series of weird AF dreams and popping in during random moments of my life. One of the first dreams I experienced was me sitting on the toilet with all my family surrounding me and some weird little creatures waiting outside the bathroom, who all looked at me with enthusiasm. I remember looking at my mother and wondering, who the hell is that person? And suddenly I just knew that that was my mother. I remember that when I finished doing my business, I looked down the toilet and saw that it was painted the color of my country's flag, at which point everyone erupted in cheers and joy, and then the dream cut off. I'll spare you the rest of the details since it was pretty much just random moments of my childhood, such as meeting people or random moments with my family. For example, I can recall seeing two childhood friends for what was, to me, the first time, but to them in reality, it had been many, many meetings, and I thought to myself, so these are my friends. That being said, however, I distinctly remember gaining total control of myself at around my 3rd birthday, whereas everyone was partying. I pretty much just woke up suddenly and began wondering who the hell these people are on my birthday. I myself didn't even know it was my birthday until it was time for the cake. Ever since then I've really been pretty much the oddball for everyone. I didn't really have many friends, and everyone seemed to inherently dislike me for whatever reason that was mysterious to me, but after 25 years of life, I'd say my life is pretty good, and I'm at the point where I've met the love of my life, and I'd say I'm the happiest I've ever been. However, now that I am happy, I simply can't shake the reality of my own mortality, and it is a topic that has been keeping me up at night for nearly a month now. That all being said, I would like to share 2 paranormal experiences I've personally had. The first one was about when I was still a kid, around 4 to 5 years old or more, back at my villa that my grandfather built. I could always hear what sounded like a stereotypical witch's laugh. I could hear it as if it was coming from behind the window of the room or from within the walls I was in. However, when I checked it out, there would be nothing, nor would there be any traces of anything. I still frankly can't explain it, but we sold the villa, and frankly I never bothered thinking about it until I began revising my life for any memories this month. The second encounter was fairly late, however, I'd say around the age of 14 to 15, about a year after my grandfather died. It started first with some weird activity. I felt like I was always watched, and I heard noises from around the house. Once even my door slammed open even though it was locked, and there was no physical way it could have opened unless someone unlocked it. I even saw as the handle went down as if someone had quite literally hit the handle. Then whispers started as a faint noise but then quite quickly grew into an ear-ringing whisper. When I first heard it, I panicked because it just wasn't normal. I went to wake up my parents, and the weirdest realization got me: I could outrun the whispers. It was as if the whispers came from a physical place even though I couldn't see it or even be able to pass through it. It was a tough night for me, as my parents thought I was crazy since they couldn't hear nor see anything, and I just shriveled near the wall and plugged my ears. Interesting fact, I could still hear those whispers as if I hadn't plugged my ears. They threatened to put me in the hospital if this happened again. The next 1 to 2 days I couldn't stop thinking about what it was, repeating in my mind every second of what happened, and I became more curious about what the duck that was than afraid. Sure enough, 1 to 2 days later, at the same time at night, I began hearing the whispers, so I just lay on my bed, turned my head towards the wall, closed my eyes, and tried to listen. It was as if thousands of people all tried to whisper different things in unknown languages into my ear, and as I listened, it just suddenly stopped, and it never happened again. The third encounter was in a dream only a week or 2 after the whispers. In my dream was my deceased grandfather, who I saw in what appeared to be a dark, dimly lit stage. When I saw him, I simply felt such remorse and sadness from how I missed him and what I had done during my life and how we never managed to say goodbye to each other that I just dropped to his knees, hugged him, and began profusely apologizing for everything while crying like there was no tomorrow. I have never had such a dream before or again since. That's pretty much it for me. Let me know what you think about my life story rant, and let me know if you have any ideas as to what this puzzle is. The day I saw my deceased mother. Or what appeared to be my deceased mother. When I was 16, I lost my mother to breast cancer. The first few years after her passing, many strange events had occurred. The first one that I can remember was right before her funeral. It may have been a day or two after she passed away. My father, my sister, and I were on the computer trying to pick out a casket. My mother had told us she wanted a light pink casket to symbolize her battle with breast cancer. We found a beautiful champagne pink casket, but I noticed my dad's look of disapproval when he saw the price tag. Let's just look at a few other ones, he said. Almost immediately, the computer just shut off. No warning, no glitch, just totally shut off. My sister and I chuckled and said, "That's Mom's way of saying she wanted that casket." My dad nervously laughed and said, "All right, fine, we'll go with the champagne pink casket." As soon as he finished his sentence, his computer turned back on again like nothing even happened. At that point, we were all a little bit on edge with how strong my mother's energy was from the other side. And after this incident, shit only got weirder. Little things would happen here and there that simply did not have an explanation. I recall my dad had bought a few cartons of milk, he drinks a lot of protein shakes, and one of them went completely missing within the hour he got home from the store. Of course, he strongly believed I hid it or was pulling his leg. After swearing up and down that I certainly was not pranking him, we kind of just stood there in disbelief. He and I both agreed, he definitely had bought 3 cartons of milk, and now, one of them has just vanished into thin air. We never did find out what happened to it. The same thing happened about a couple weeks later to a huge case of pre-workout powder he had bought. The funny thing about that was the fact that my mom would always tell him to stop taking that shit because it's not good for you. At this point, we were kind of getting used to all of these strange happenings in the house. About a month or two after my mom died, something even stranger had occurred. I was about to leave the house to go on a date, and I stopped in front of the door to search for my lanyard in my disorganized purse. When I finally found my keys to pull them out, the lanyard must have gotten caught around my pack of cigarettes because they went flying out of my purse along with my keys. I mention this because this incident is exactly how I know that I did, in fact, have my keys that night. Let me remind you, I was only 16 years old at the time, and my father had no idea I was smoking cigarettes. He definitely found out when he saw them fall out of my purse and onto the floor. I quickly gathered my things and ran out the door and locked it behind me. He never did confront me about the cigarettes. Anyways, my boyfriend at the time and I went out to dinner and had a couple beers down the road in his parents' garage. I recall opening the beer bottles with the bottle opener on my keychain. I mention this, also, because it was verification that I still had my keys on me that night. However, when he dropped me off at home a few hours later, I couldn't find them anywhere. We backtracked our steps that night and went out looking for my stupid keys, but there was literally no sign of them anywhere. Luckily, we had a spare house key in the yard, so I was able to get in my house without waking up my dad. I kind of shrugged it off and figured I'd find my keys the next day or something. When I walked into the house, it was probably 2 a.m., and all of the lights were off. I was about to head straight to bed, but something in the back of my mind kept telling me to go to the office. The office was on the other side of the house, but I couldn't understand why something in my mind kept coercing me to go there. For some unknown reason, I listened to that voice. And when I flipped on the light switch, my lanyard and keys were sitting in the middle of the office floor. I was so creeped out that I actually called my boyfriend and said, "Turn around and come get me. I'm not staying in this ducking house anymore." When he picked me up, I told him what had happened. He wasn't a paranormal believer at all. He was a very logical person and was always trying to find a logical reason for everything. That all changed over the next few years of our relationship the more he'd come over to my house. My then boyfriend only stayed over a couple of times at my house in high school. My dad was out of town a lot for his job, and I could never understand why my boyfriend didn't want to stay over. He told me that the couple of times he did sleep over, he had nightmares about the office in my house. He said in his dreams, he was protecting something in the office, but he didn't know what it was. The weird thing is, I was having the same dreams, and so was my best friend, who was staying with me at the time. She lived with me at my house for a few months our senior year of high school. One night, it was just him and me at my house. My friend was out at a party. My boyfriend went to take a nap in my bedroom, and I was cooking dinner. Out of nowhere, he came storming out with his shoes in his hands and said, "Nope. Duck this house. I'm leaving." I tried to grab his arm to get him to explain to me what was going on. Did I make him mad? What happened? I turned off the stove and grabbed my purse and keys and went running out after him. It took him a solid minute to finally say something. I woke up briefly from my nap and opened my eyes and thought I saw you standing there. I asked you what you were doing, and when my eyes finally adjusted, I realized it wasn't you. I've never met your mom before, but I'm 99% sure it was her standing next to the bed. I will never go back into that house ever again. Now, at this point, nobody had ever seen a ghost at my house. We had only experienced weird things and similar dreams. I snorted and laughed at him, thinking he was kidding, but he wasn't. About a few months later, I saw her too. When my friend who was living with me, Savannah, was blow-drying her hair in my guest bedroom, I saw what appeared to be a person, out of the corner of my eye, walking down my hallway going towards the office. At the time, I thought it was Savannah. I began to follow her around the corner and yelled, "You can't just leave the blow dryer on if you aren't using it." And that's when I heard Savannah scream back from the guest bedroom, "What?" At this point, I realized I wasn't following Savannah towards the office. The person I was following appeared to be my mother, in the same dress that she wore in her casket at the funeral. After she entered the doorway of the office, I peeked in with my heart pounding out of my chest and didn't see anybody there. It's been 10 years since my mom died. I have had my parents' home blessed by our local Catholic priest, who was a good friend of my mother's. After the house was blessed, the paranormal activity completely stopped. To this day, I'm not entirely sure if I've found anything of importance in that office. I still wonder about it from time to time. I am now happily married, living on the other side of town, and my husband and I do paranormal investigations for fun. I've run into my ex-boyfriend from high school a couple of times over the years, and he still says that he wasn't a believer until he experienced it for himself. My husband believes it wasn't the spirit of my mother but perhaps something called a familiar spirit, which can disguise itself as a deceased loved one and is typically malevolent. I'm not entirely sure if it was my mom, or if it wasn't, but I have not had anything like this occur in my life since then.